episode of the Break the Rules stream. It is a great pleasure to be here today with Max Derrat and Richmond Lee, aka Art Eater of the Great Art Eater Collective. You eat the art and it inspires you to create great art of your own, which we are going to be showcasing today. I finally have another little screen here. You can see Max Derrat is here, and here is Richard Lee. Max Derrat, wonderful guest of Break the Rules, has been here before several times, getting to the deep mystery of what exactly attracts us to anime, the Japanese-style video games, this aesthetic, as well as what's going on beyond that. So before we get started, once again, all the new people who are coming in here, please be sure to subscribe, add a like. It all helps the algorithm. And as far as Richmond goes, I would love to know more about yourself. You're working on a video game right now as well. Here, I'm looking at it, Zeta Tactics. So please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started, what this video game is that you're working on, as well as your fascination with anime. And then I'm going to bring it back to Max Derrat as well. So there we go.
All right. Wow, what an intro. Really happy to be here. Where to start? Okay. So my name is Richmond Lee. I've been working in games since 2007. I've always loved, art and games, anime, manga, comics, all this fun stuff. Let's see. I actually grew up in Thailand and Taiwan before up till the age of 5, and then I moved to the U.S. And that'll be pretty relevant to this conversation today, because the cartoons I grew up with was, it was all like anime, a lot of like classic Japanese anime and manga, and also classic American stuff. And then I moved to America, saw like a lot of American cartoons too, all that stuff was a big influence on me. I'm working on this game, Zeka Tactics. I run a studio called BitEgg. We do really cool games. This is our first major big game, but we've done like smaller game projects in the past. This is our first attempt at a real. This is what we've been sharpening our swords for. Like, this is the game that we've been dreaming about making. It's a turn-based tactical RPG with a very anime-inspired aesthetic. Hugely inspired by like shonen manga and like classic mecha anime from like the 80s and 90s. Hopefully you can take a look. It's Zeka Tactics, Zecha, like mecha, but with a Z. You can find us on Twitter. And just let us know what you think of the game. I'm just super happy to be here.
Really, really beautiful designs. And looking at this guy in particular, it reminds me of that barge in Xenogears, which I hope we'll get into as well. Max Derrat, you made an amazing Xenogears video. I know Richmond had a chance to look at it, where you also dive very deep into the Gnosticism of what's going on in that game. And I would love to find out what exactly inspired you to be so into digging deep into the world of video games, and I guess in this, for the sake of this conversation, the video games that are inspired by this anime culture, which I don't know if you would say it's primarily Japanese culture, because it has expanded outwards, like the inspiration, for example, that Richmond is utilizing. So let me know what you think. What exactly inspired you to do all this stuff that you're doing right now with these subjects of anime and video games?
Well, honestly, Lev, I was kind of surprised that you asked me to come and talk about this, because it makes me think that you view me as like I could be some sort of authority when it comes to anime. But honestly, I've only really started watching anime in the last year, thanks to the efforts of my girlfriend, who's very much inside of that entire world. And also the efforts of my fans who've been trying to pull me towards anime and games that have anime type aesthetics, like Xenogears, like Chrono Trigger, like those types of games that came out in that era. I suppose if I were to say what is drawing me to this aesthetic and these products, and what has sort of kept my interest in them over the last year, is that compared to animation from the West, even though there's a lot of good animation from the West, I love, even though we don't see as much 2D animation nowadays, I love 3D animation, I love Pixar, DreamWorks, all that type of good stuff. But in comparison, I find that anime tends to go into a lot deeper subjects. There's a lot more subtext with the types of stories that they're trying to tell. They treat their audience as a lot more mature and sophisticated and capable of handling these types of deep stories. Whereas with Western animation, it seems to be a lot more surface level. Not always, but more so. And I find that with the anime that I've been introduced to, let's see what I watched. I've recently watched Cowboy Bebop, Neon Genesis Evangelion, trying to get into Ergo Proxy. I'll eventually get through it. But with all of those, I find that whereas other people maybe in our part of the world would just sort of pass it off as, oh, it's just a cartoon. No, it's some of the deepest philosophical, psychological, existential questions have been put forward in these works of art. And it seems to be nonstop. Like there's a never-ending source of that sort of thing in the world of anime and in the video games that sort of embrace that style. So yeah, hopefully if people are listening to this that watch me on YouTube, they can point me to more games that are like that. Like I just said, Xenogears, Chrono Trigger, any other games that are like that, Richmond, I'm sure you can point me in the right direction.
Well, Metal Gear Solid. I think Metal Gear Solid, which is a game that you did one of your most popular videos about, even though the aesthetic of that, I think, is inspired more by a lot of Western action movies, including the main character of Solid Snake, there is still something that I think happens when people who grow up in a different kind of culture, like Japan, for instance, take something like a lot of these American concepts, and in a way I think Kojima was able to take it and twist it around and turn it into something that's even deeper than whatever it is he may have seen with some of the popular American movies. Now, this could be like it could be just like a weeb animu bias on my part to think like, like they have that meme where this guy goes to see something that's in Europe, and then looks at the same thing in Japan. It's like, oh my god, like this is so noble and amazing. So again, it could just be bias from wanting the grass to be greener on the other side and besmirching whatever it is that's in your own culture, or do you think that there is something to, regardless of people being inspired by it, why do you guys think it is that Japan, this relatively small island nation, was able to get the jump start on this very particular way of seeing things and ended up becoming a phenomenon both in animation and video games? So I know, Richmond, as somebody who was inspired by this early on, what do you think is going on there?
Oh man, this is such a big topic, but I would say the reason, to me, the most clear reason why so many people tend to get really into anime is what generally hooks people who get specifically into anime is they suddenly discover these stories that present stuff that they just don't get anywhere else. There's such a broad range of stuff out there in anime and manga and stuff that they find these stories that they can connect to deeply because they're so niche. And I think that's one of the strengths of anime and just a lot of Japanese media in general, is that historically they're not afraid to get like super niche with stuff. And it has to do with a lot of things, but I think generally what people are responding to is that it's super creator driven, and a lot of the creators feel very free to just dive deep into whatever it is that they're obsessing over personally. And I'm vastly simplifying. I'm sure you could find examples of productions where people were like, oh, I was forced to do this or that. But by and large, if you compare that to say like Hollywood, which is the dominant industry in America, like that's like super metrics driven, right? It's very much about like data, like even before like social media and computer algorithms, there was they would take like census data, they would take polls. A lot of stuff would be driven by this desire to reach the widest pool of people possible, and so you tend to get more watered down stuff there, whereas anime is not afraid to be super niche. Like Kojima stuff is super weird. It's absolutely bizarre, right? It's way weirder that like he's he might be inspired by like Michael Bay movies and stuff, but like it'll just get absolutely super intensely into stuff, and that's why it's great. Like it's great because it's not afraid to get so strange.
Well, before I go into the deeper waters about Gnosticism and so forth, I want to address what I think a lot of people who do like anime are feeling right now when it comes to Western culture. To put it frankly, a lot of them are sensing that there is a lot of wokeness in Western culture today. I think partly because of the by committee design that a lot of products have to go through. And in the way that they see anime is this antithesis where there is more focus on not like what the identity of the hero is, like Luffy, for example, but more what does Luffy do? How does Luffy overcome whatever challenges come his way? And same thing with a lot of different anime. So I'm curious, what is it that you guys are seeing happening today where people are being drawn to anime? Do you see something potentially negative here that maybe well-intentioned Western media is going to be ignored because people will think like, oh, maybe they're going to do something just for the sake of making it diverse, so I'm just going to stick with the tried and true anime, which still has, according to them, more traditional concept. So I don't know who wants to take that first.
Well, I have a theory on that.
Well, let's go. Okay, let's go Max, then Geo, and then Richmond. So, Max, any thoughts on that?
So the question is, what do I think the ultimate result of that sort of going towards more Puritan is a bit of a strong word, but you know what I mean, going more in that direction when it comes to the art that we produce? Is that what you're asking?
It would be more going towards not so much purity, but more about the audience, more about what exactly is the audience going to be going to be looking towards in Western media in comparison to anime, where they're afraid that now a lot of, and again, I'm not talking about everybody, I'm talking about specifically people who are not a big fan of a lot of heavily inserted woke stuff in Western media.
Right,
Like,
okay.
like what are they going to be doing regarding Western media now? Are they going to give up on it and go right into anime? Or is there any way of kind of salvaging, like getting all those parts from anime that they like, bring it back into Western media, kind of creating a happy medium? Or do you think,
okay.
or do you think they're completely wrong, that the Western media is doing just as well and they should embrace a lot of these concepts and not be bigots?
So I see a couple things happening here. First, I think that when it comes to a lot of the stuff that people tend to get outraged over, it sort of gets forgotten over there like a week or two, because the news cycle is just so fast and so consistent that there's always something new happening. And whatever we're outraged about, like let's say, I don't know, the Activision Blizzard scandal, right? People will talk about how awful it is for a couple of weeks, but then in a few months when Diablo Immortal comes out, they'll get it on their phones, right? And start giving them money again, that sort of thing. But then on the other side, I do see people sort of putting their money where their mouth is and trying to go towards products that don't embrace that type of, as you say, woke culture. And if that's what they want to do, and that's what the way the market goes, then so be it. I think that there are circumstances where it does go too far, but then I also think that there are circumstances where people call things woke that aren't necessarily woke. The devil's in the details, right? But as far as general trends, I think it's one of those two. It's either people just forget about it or they'll just go elsewhere. And I think Japan, whether they get it from Japan or elsewhere, it's definitely one of the places where people can go to get sort of that content that they desire. Yeah.
And Geo?
I think that, well, I'm not a weeb myself, but I have many friends, especially online, especially in the political right, who are weebs. And they've told me that, and I've watched a few, I've watched a JoJo, Berserk. But from what they tell me, it's that because Japan is viewing the Western world from the outside, but yet is a very advanced, some ways more advanced than us, civilization, and has a rich history and especially a rich aesthetic sensibility. So I've, in academia, I studied, because of my, studies in Zen Buddhism and so forth, I studied a lot of like aesthetic philosophy around ink painting and no theater and ukiyo-e woodcuts, and as an artist myself. So the Japanese, they have a very nuanced aesthetic sensibility. So when they take a lot of when anime became like popular, which is like from the beginning, and sort of like a combination of Western and Eastern influences, right? Because I think it was like right around World War II was like the first anime. What was it called? Astro Boy or
Yeah, Otomo
no?
Tezuka.
Yeah. So when they take a lot of elements from West, like, and let's face it, it's kind of cargo culted, they'll take like aesthetic pictures of Western culture, either from Victorian England or various Christianized themes and so forth. They don't have the same degree of like history or judgment, the judgment that comes from history, and of course people who narrativize Western history nowadays. So they have a very honest view of the beauty and the grandeur of these aesthetic templates. So I think like Western weebs that like watch anime, it's so attractive to them because they're sort of like in a weird way getting Western culture like unfiltered, without like the nonsense of we have to confront classism and racism and so forth in Victorian England. Like JoJo, isn't that like from Victorian England or some?
Yeah, it did start in Victorian England. But as far as confronting classism, racism, I think those are important things to keep in mind as well. But I understand what you're talking about in terms of getting like getting like more of a I don't know if pure is the right word here, but I know, Richmond, you grew up, I know that you grew up watching the Gundam franchise in the 90s. Would you say Gundam Wing, for example, was a big franchise for you growing up?
I wasn't super into Gundam Wing, but it was a big deal. It was very popular in Thailand when I was a kid, and actually in Asia, it was kind of regarded as like, oh, that's like the Gundam for girls. Like a lot of it was
yeah. Well, I knew a girl who had a tattoo of those two, of a Duo and what's his name, Hero, on her back, like a giant tattoo of them. Amazing.
Yeah. But really, everyone was into it. Like a lot of I do, a lot of young ladies like the beautiful young men in the series,
yes.
But they also like the robots. Gundam's always had a huge female fan base, and then the show was real big in the U.S. too. It was for a lot of people. It was their first exposure to anime, but
well, the reason I bring it up specifically is when I take a look at people like Trace Kushranada, for example. Here I'm looking at him up right now. Here are some images of good old Trace. And you look at the kind of aesthetics that he has, wearing this uniform with the pauldrons and all that. And I'm not saying he's the only one, like going back to Char Aznable, if I'm saying his last name correctly, from the original Gundam series. This was somebody who also dressed in this, kind of like Zex Marquis from Gundam Wing, somebody who dressed in this very elegant-looking outfit. And I think that the Geo's point here is kind of cemented with looking at these series, where they are able to take very beautiful aesthetics that may have been looked at today by more of this left-leaning academia as being, part of the cis-white heteropatriarchy. They may be looking at them with fresher eyes and saying like, oh, like this is really beautiful, like the way these buildings are done. The Gundams themselves are evocative, at least to me, of sacred geometry and statues and things of that nature. And I think that there is a thirst that people have subconsciously for that kind of beauty. But do you think that may be taking this a little bit too far? What do you think, Richmond?
Taking what?
Just the idea that people in their subconscious are seeing a lot of this, are seeing a lot of objective standards of beauty and how the Gundams are done and how the outfits are displayed. Like the.
Oh, okay. So first off, I don't know. Like the term woke is being used. Like I personally try to stay very far away from like very ideological.
Yeah, good idea.
Like I just tried. I really have no interest in like people arguing left versus right politics and foisting that on series like that aren't necessarily about that. But something like Gundam obviously is highly political. So like just taking a step back, you're talking about like a lot of people get into anime because they feel like it's giving them something that they no longer get from American culture, and
Yeah.
they say like, "Oh, American culture is too woke," and so I don't
Yes.
use that term. I really try to stay far away from that kind of
That's
thing.
completely fine.
And it helps keep me sane. But I think what they're referring to, what you're getting at, is like, they want to just be able to like turn off their brains and enjoy something aesthetically.
Not exactly. I want to be
Yeah.
very clear, and I respect your position here as far as avoiding a lot of that stuff. I want to be clear that when I'm talking about it, we can take politics as we could traditionally see them on Twitter aside. Let's just throw the politics away. When I'm talking about woke or whatever word you want to use here, what I mean is that there is beyond aesthetics certain values that you would see in anime. For example, the character not being based so much around who they identify is their identity politics. Identity politics does not seem to be a strong factor in it. Instead, like I said with Luffy or these other shonen heroes, it's more about the kind of effort that they put into something, kind of like the opposite of, for example, a lot of boomers like to joke about, oh, our generations today, they get all these participatory trophies. So it's a different kind of mindset that focuses, I think, more on what can I bring to the table? What can I do to give satisfaction in my life from showing everybody around me that I am capable of not only pulling my weight, but that I am capable of achieving greatness? And that seems to be something that, at least in the West, you don't have to call it woke, we could call it something else, but that appears to be less of a focus, or at least that's how people are seeing it today, that there's more of a focus on that within the anime world. So I don't know, Richmond, if you would agree or disagree, but that seems to be where a lot of people are coming from here.
Well, I mean, there's such a broad range of like anime out there that, I mean, you can find stuff that's very much about like a particular identity, whether that's like an ethnic identity or your job, or I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there. And I mean, there's stuff that like the creators of these series, if you had it translated into English, people could interpret it as being woke or whatever. I think maybe a big part of the issue is that a lot of this stuff, once it goes online, it gets really like reductive and simplified, and people are no longer talking about the thing. They're really thinking about certain people that they've had a bad experience with, and then sort of relating, like they're like, oh, this person I know that is terrible likes this thing, and now I will like dislike that thing. I think that's at the root of like what a lot of people have issue with. But as far as sort of like the other thing about the anime being about self motivation and self actualization and stuff, I do think that is generally like just a really big theme in a lot of Japanese stuff, outside of the whole debate of like woke, whatever that means, identity politics, whatever that means to people. I do think people do respond to these stories of these really like self-determined characters, and I guess like a lot of that comes from a lot of the most popular anime comes from manga. It's based off of manga, right? And so most of the most popular ones, like Demon Slayer, Dragon Ball, One Piece, Naruto, they come from Shonen Jump, right? Which is the most popular comic book periodical in the world, and just one of the most popular periodicals, period. And their core values from the beginning have always been friendship, effort, and victory. So those are the core themes that they try to promote in their comics, and they're very broad about it because they actually have like an incredible variety of content in there. But generally, they do have these really popular series about people kind of getting through stuff through like sheer willpower, and that willpower aspect, I think a lot of people find that really appealing about a lot of anime. And even as a kid, that's something I found really appealing about a lot of anime and manga and stuff. Is it's these characters were winning through their own efforts. And when I watched American stuff, even as a kid, I a lot of times I felt like a lot of American cartoons were a little bit too convenient. Like the bad guy would screw up, the bad guy would lose, and then the good guys, like through a stroke of luck, would win. And I'd be like, I feel kind of cheated. Like they didn't, like they didn't really win. And just my impression was I felt like a lot of stuff was a bit patronizing. And the reason the stories were like this is that it was very easy to tell, like in the 80s and 90s stuff that was meant for kids, they would stray away from certain topics, and they would really never put the characters in that much danger. So whereas like
Mm.
anime, manga, like Asian stuff in general, they have no problem with child endangerment in media, right? Like
Yes.
kids go through hell in this stuff.
Hmm.
And so I think what people are responding to is just sort of that's pretty universal, right? Outside of the whole debate of like woke politics, identity politics, I think they're just responding to something very appealing on a very base instinct um, that has been reduced in a lot of American media. But I think it's coming back. I
Hmm.
do. I think there's a lot of cool American productions now too. And even as a kid, I liked a lot of American shows too.
One of my favorites, by the way, and I want to go to Max, but one of my favorite shows recently for Adult Swim is Smiling Friends. I don't know if you got a chance to see that, but I see
I heard that was great. Yeah.
I see Smiling Friends as being an antithesis of a lot of this very, how do I say it? And I like Rick and Morty too, but Rick and Morty has this very nihilistic approach to life, and
Yeah.
it seems like Smiling Friends is the opposite of that. And a lot of the, I wouldn't say just shonen, I would say shoujo does it in a different way. Shoujo, and that's another interesting thing, by the way. And I don't want to go again fully identity based here, but I think that anime and manga, they are able to say, like, you know what, even though there's kind of like a mix, like you could say Sailor Moon, for example, is sort of a mix in the anime, there are certain things that guys would be into, like younger boys. There are certain things men would be into. There are certain things women would be into, and that's okay. And if you're a guy, you could be into the shoujo as well, but still, there's no problem with saying that, people kind of go with their own thing, and, that's all good. And that is something that I think is also lacking today, where, like you said, to put it even further to, let's say, what Max, I think, may talk about a little bit more, is that there are certain archetypes, like the Jungian archetypes in history, that people want to strive towards, which is why I think we had various ceremonies back in the day of boys becoming men, where they had to go through some kind of a trial, some kind of a ritual, and come out the other end, and now they've grown, they've achieved something. And I think too much online today, people are spending time trying to be validated without doing something that would earn that validation through their own effort. And my hope is that that's going to change as well, that we're going to figure out ways of getting a lot of younger kids to feel that sense of satisfaction. Because I think no matter how much you compliment them, again, like you said, patronize, no matter how much you patronize people, it's not going to be the same. They have to feel that sense of something that they earned. And I think anime
Well, I
is something
think
that kind of goes to that. Yeah.
no, I think it's because anime, they do have such a large plethora of different creators and different subgenres, that it's the sort of like issue of like what representation and whether it's forced upon certain productions in the West. I think like they've largely done a good job of it. Another thing, like for example, what you were describing, Richmond, is almost because I'm a huge fan of I'm not a like I'm not big in anime, but I'm a huge fan of Japanese wrestling. Like and it's similar to what the whole like strong style around they call fighting spirit, like Tukan, where it's like you take punishment, you come up. It's like that. It's got that sort of storyline that comes from Japanese folklore. It's very similar. But I think like when it comes to anime, the fact that like you were saying, Gundams have a huge female fan base. I think like in some ways it's good that like pro wrestling in Japan, like a lot of other things that are traditionally in the West slotted as like young male, like orientated. The fact that like they are kind of like open to having a wide variety of an audience, from like young and old, men, women, so forth. I think like they managed to avoid a lot of like the issues that come with certain cultural products that are slotted in the West as like you're largely like young male type of thing, like cartoons or wrestling or whatever. Like I think, yeah, so they've managed to sort of like avoid a lot of the problems with like this studio in the West having to like put this amount of representation, like it's a quantifiable thing. Because like from the beginning they've had like female creators in Japan and so forth. Like what's the what's that one genre called that's predominantly for young women?
Shoujo.
Shoujo.
Shoujos. Yeah. There you go. So it's like, yeah, it's a no. I think it's because it's not really a big deal in Japan. Like, I mean, Japan. Let's face it. That, like, you don't want to like exoticize them. They do have like a lot of like political issues when it comes to female representation. But for the most part, yeah.
And there are problems like with the hikikomori people who are just living without interacting with society.
But the anime aesthetic, it feeds into that as well. Like you have.
Well, I do want to get into that with Max. So I want to bridge the talk
he
about.
Did a video on that.
Yeah.
Wait, that's messed up. Speaking of hikikomori, I want to go over to Max. Sorry, go ahead.
So
we're all there, brother.
Yeah. So if you notice the cover of the thumbnail, I have the one of the main characters from Xenogears. What's her name?
Elohim?
Elohim, or Ellie for short. And you could see like she's in a very provocative pose, and she's wearing the kind of outfit that would make anybody blush, where she has almost like these leather straps over here that make her breasts look very much in your face. And that's accepted, and it's been accepted in a lot of different anime as well, going all the way back to Gunbuster. I don't know, Richard, if you're a fan of Gunbuster.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. And even there, like, they were wearing these very impractical outfits of like these bikini bottoms with these gaps, these straps in them.
I watched that with my mom when I was a kid. And I had no idea there would be all those. Yeah, there was a lot of like.
Yes.
Fan service, like full nudity. And I just remember I was like maybe 11 or 12. I was like, oh my God, this is so awkward. But she enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's kind of relevant to this conversation is so a lot of this stuff that does get politicized in America now, I think a lot of it comes down to just people in Japan. And okay, I'm not Japanese, so I can't speak of Japan authoritatively, but I can speak about a broader Asian culture. I grew up in Thailand. My mom's originally from Taiwan. I spent several years there. And just in general, I think people are more laid back about like what people watch. Like my dad was like, he took me to see RoboCop when I was 5. That movie's terrifying, right? But that generation, like, they were just like, just what, it's just a movie, right? And so, I mean, within reason, right? Like, yeah. So I think just generally people are a bit more relaxed about just having fun and watching stuff, and then I think of what people call like identity politics or stuff now. People are more sensitive to content, I'd say, in America than they are in Asia, very, very broadly speaking.
Mm-hmm. But do you think it's also... Well, I want to get Max to speak here. I know, Max, you don't have a lot of time, so I want to get even deeper with this particular concept of even something like the skimpily dressed anime girl, for instance. So in shoujo, you have a very different aesthetic. You have a lot more, let's say, frillier dresses for women, and the guys have a lot more of this kind of like androgynous face, but it's also kind of sharp. And in the shonen anime and in seinen, you would have women who are, very voluptuous a lot of times, and like we said before with Ellie there. So what can you say beyond just, this very base fan service idea of, oh, look, boobies and all that stuff? What can you say beyond that, maybe going on here with why a lot of guys in particular are very much into this anime kind of like semi-neotenous aesthetic with like these big eyes and these very accentuated... I mean, the accentuated features I get, but then you have the big eyes, and then you have this kind of like sharp chin going on. So from what you were able to see, what do you think is going on there at like maybe a deeper, primordial, Jungian level, if you will? I don't know if I can put Jungian archetypes and the big-eyed anime girls together, but I'm going to try. I don't know. Is there something there?
The platonic form of women, Lev.
Well, I will say basically what I just said at the very beginning. You get with anime this desire to tackle certain complex subjects that you really just don't get in any other form of Western media. Like take Ghost in the Shell, for example. Like the closest thing that I think we have gotten to Ghost in the Shell in the West is The Matrix, which the Matrix attributes a lot of its existence to the existence of Ghost in the Shell. But even with the Matrix, it doesn't go to the philosophical and psychological depths that Ghost in the Shell does, because I guess they just have to dumb it down for a Western audience, which is just too bad. And because, to go to what Richmond said before, the Japanese anime, it's based around sort of catering to those niche markets. While those niche markets also exist in the West, and because we can't get any of that in the West, we have to go to Japan to get those types of stories. But that actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask Richmond a question on that subject. Why, obviously, business is a large part of anything that goes along with art. And when you produce art, you have to make a profit in order to make sure that you can do more. What is it about anime that makes it possible for them to cater to these smaller audiences, these niche audiences, and continue to be able to produce them? I just don't understand.
I can tell you exactly what it is. They're made with smaller budgets. So there is a American director that actually has the director of Tekken Concrete. Sorry, his name escapes me right now. Give me 1 second.
Tekken Concrete, I believe, was also written by an American, I think, unless I'm mistaken.
So the source comic is by Taiyo Matsumoto, and it was released in America as black and white originally. Awesome comic. I loved it. And the movie was very good, too. The director, his name is Michael Arias, and he was an editor in America. I think he worked in like Hollywood, maybe TV production, went to Japan, worked in Japanese productions, eventually got into anime. And years ago, he gave an interview. Someone asked him the same question, like, "Oh, how do they have so much variety?" And he said, "Well, it's a cottage industry. The budgets are really small. People get paid very little, but because of that, they have more freedom. So a lot of people choose. Basically, it's like a trade-off, right? Like less budget, more freedom. The less money is put into it, the more of a risk you can take.
Kind of like with hentai, for example, where it would be very it would be very low budget, and
so it can appeal to a large variety of fetishes.
But it's also interesting the way that it's done, where just not only hentai but in anime in general, you would have certain shots that are incredibly well drawn and very detailed and very animated, but then you would have other ones that are very still. Like, they know where exactly to put in the detail, like Akira, for example. You would have a lot of shots that are breathtaking, like the motorbike ride, and then you would have other ones where it's just like a still character just moving their mouth. And, it comes from, like, limited animation, but smart limited animation.
Well, Akira is actually Akira is like always animating, but other anime by and large is often very still. Sometimes it's for budgetary reasons, but sometimes it's very deliberate. Like in Mamoru Oshii films, he has a lot of scenes where it's a character from the back talking, and some people like to say, "Oh, it's to save money," but like, no, that's just if he wanted to, he could have told someone to animate it more fully. It's just he likes these still shots. So a lot of times it's like a stylistic thing too.
Well, in Xenogears, that was not the case. Like, Max, that the second part of Xenogears, and I'm not going to do any spoilers, but they had people, because it was over budget, the only way they could get away with continuing on the story, even though I think the producer wanted to say, you know what, part one, let's just end it right there. They said, no, we have this complete story, so let's just have the characters sit down in their little chair and narrate what exactly is happening, and then go right into the boss battles for every scenario they described. And, they made the best of it. I mean, I think it could have been done way better if they did have the time and budget. But again, like Richmond was talking about, these are things that have to be balanced out. But beyond the anime girls, because I know that's 48, and I know you have to leave very soon, Max, I want to get as much as possible of your perspective on the deeper aspects of anime, on what exactly you think may be going on subconsciously with people who are observing some of the more highbrow works. Like, what are some of the concepts that you were able to get from something like Xenogears, Metal Gear Solid, certain things you think are going to be coming up much more often in our times today?
Well, it's such a difficult question. Well, what are some of the more popular animes? What are some of the ones that are more revered? That'd be Evangelion, manga, be Berserk.
Hmm.
A lot of them deal with these really old ideas that sort of sit at the basis of our cultures. And I think that's part of the reason why so many of the forms of Japanese media that I've consumed, be it video games, anime, a lot of them deal with concepts that originated in the West. Evangelion, it's the Hebrew Kabbalah. Same thing with Xenogears, Gnosticism, and the Hebrew Kabbalah. Silent Hill, which I'm huge on, that dealt with a lot of Christian concepts. And those concepts sit at the basis, the foundation of those games, but then they're expanded upon in all these creative ways. Whereas if you could contrast that with some of the stuff that we get in the West today, the Western media, it's a lot more postmodern. And, they're like going beyond sort of the standards to try and tread new territory. That there's utility in that. And there is some good postmodern media. But sometimes it's good to rely on those things that have fascinated us for centuries to produce media. And I think the creators of anime, manga, games, whatever, realize that. And they, like American weebs, it's sort of like the reverse of them. They go into our culture, expand upon it, and make great things out of it. Whereas it doesn't seem to be so much the inverse. Hopefully, does that answer your question at all? Okay.
No, definitely.
Well, there's some good postmodern, like in Western cartooning. I mean, Duckman is a good example. Courage Cowardly Dog had like a lot of
Well, these are
themes, but
these are great, but these are all old now. Like, what would you say would be today good examples of Western media going as deep as it can?
Well, as far as the cartoon goes, like the only, like, I watched Avatar: The Last Airbender recently, but even then, that's sort of very inspired by certain Japanese ideals when it comes to that type of content creation. As far as profound Western media, I can't really say that I find that in the realm of animation, unfortunately. But you do see it from time to time in movies, in games. Like, for example, one of my favorite games of the last 5 years is a game called Control by Sam Lake. He's the guy who did Max Payne and Alan Wake, Quantum Break. He deals with a lot of those really profound ideas and created a masterpiece out of it. But those seem to be more the exception rather than the rule, because we're still getting yearly releases of Assassin's Creed, and EA is still a company and crap like that. So,
and there is also this idea that there is an Eastern Western philosophical divide. Do you think that something like the anime and video games we mentioned is bridging it in a way, because it's able to bring in all these concepts? Like, what would you say? And this would be like an entire philosophical discussion that would take hours and hours, so there's no way I expect any of us here to be able to shrink it down. But if you can, in brief, say, what do you see as being this intellectual, philosophical synthesis of East and West that you've seen presented? How would you describe it in short?
The synthesis of
various philosophical concepts, like you would say for
I don't really understand what it is that you're asking.
Okay, so for example, in Xenogears, where they had references to the Kabbalah, and they had references to Gnosticism. At the same time, there were certain, Eastern things that relate to that as well. If we're talking about Buddhism, if we're talking about Tantra, if we're talking about like all these different mystery traditions. So what I'm trying to figure out here is, do you see there being something at the heart of both the things that a lot of the Eastern mystics were yearning for, were meditating on, and a lot of these concepts? Like, do you...
Okay, yeah. I understand what you're saying now, yeah. And this is where, like, I know you've been trying to pull it out of me this entire time, but now I can actually start talking about Jung. See, I think what made Jung so fascinating to a lot of people is he was trying to find the cultural... no, not necessarily just the cultural, but the patterns that are consistent cross-culturally when it comes to the things that we value, concepts in religion, concepts in culture, the way that we act. And he synthesized them into this work where he said that the one thing that sort of connects all of us is the collective unconscious of human beings, and we sort of interpret the archetypes that lay at the foundation of that unconscious in different ways. Though they come out different in detail, they're the same in pattern. And he was trying to identify what those patterns were cross-culturally. I think with works like Xenogears, where they try to unify Eastern and Western concepts together, those tend to be the most profound because it's the ones that unify us and don't push us away based on our differences. I hope that if there's any sort of way forward where we're not being bogged down by all these things that we were talking about before, like quotas and wokeness and all that, it's going to be the things that are similar between our cultures. Hopefully, if more games like Xenogears can come out, or more movies that,
Well, I could take it one step further. I would say that one of the big things, and I know, Gio, being Christian, you may disagree on this, like being the ultimate, but I do see the concept of no self, even if it's interpreted in different ways, as being something that a lot of these are reaching towards. So the idea that everything that we are experiencing is one thing that's experiencing itself in the quote-unquote illusion of being these separate entities that are interacting with each other, and how there's this alchemical marriage of male and female energies that ends up with the realization that these two energies, even though they are split apart, they are actually one thing that's experiencing itself, while at the same time, it is, in a way, ego defeating to have something like the shonen examples of striving towards greatness. Because in a way, you're not striving towards greatness by having everybody tell you how good you are, but it's by your actions. And in that way, I think, even though there are a lot of examples of egotistical people, you are able to get out of yourself by doing things for others. And that is how you end up becoming great. So you're not just fully entrenched in me, what do I want, what do I need. So I see there being a certain quality there that a lot of these animes and video games express. But I don't know, Richmond, I don't know if you've studied Buddhism or any of these philosophical concepts, but I'm curious in your take on this as well.
Sure. So, what is the question exactly? Like that,
Well,
that
do you see a unification going on with these examples of the anime and video games with, let's say, Western mystery school traditional concepts and Eastern concepts as well? Are we getting to the truth here, an objective truth through the?
I don't know about an objective truth, but I do think it's very natural for cultures to cross-pollinate. That's just how people have always been. I think by and large, through the centuries, people are curious about other cultures, and people incorporate ideas back and forth. Right? It's a virtuous cycle, and of course nowadays that's very like sped up. Like the whole cycle of that is super sped up with the internet.
Yeah.
So I think today it really just depends on the person. I think some people, some people find this thing that they're yearning for, and they'll like find a new piece of themselves in this media. I think most people already have pretty set values, and then they take stuff and then they sort of push it into something that they already believe. And I think, for instance, that's what a lot of these online conflicts are about. It's about people taking something and then sort of forcing it into a certain, just kind of pigeonholing it. Like, this is the only way it should be interpreted. And so, yeah, I think that leads to a lot of the.
But what makes anime within not just in Japan, but like the context of Asian culture in general? I mean, when you say something like Asian culture, I mean, that's like such a huge like universe, right? Like, but is anime even popular in? Do they allow it in China now, or is that?
Oh, it's huge. It's hugely popular. Yeah. Even if, I mean, like you'll hear about them banning Death Note or something because kids are writing names in a book, but kids will find it. Yeah, they'll bootleg it. They'll stream it. Yeah, they'll find a way to watch it.
I'm surprised they haven't banned One Piece, burning the world government flag and all that.
Oh, there you go. But like, what makes anime? attractive to people as an actual legitimate and mature cultural medium that appeals to like the way that movies appeal to like most age ranges in the West? Like, why is it that in this sort of like Occidental mind, we slot it like animation as like that's what kids watch, that's kid
Mhm.
shit, right? But like, what makes it different in Asian culture, like where anime is given a respect to convey very deep topics that span a variety of age ranges. Like here, when people like look at weebs, they're like, "Oh, that's like your Arrested Development sort of thing." Like, you know, you have some kind of disorder, but like, you know what I mean. But like
Yeah.
in Asia, it's much different. Like it's kind of like, yeah, yeah. Like what
Yeah,
makes it?
so I can speak from the perspective of someone who grew up between America and Thailand. I also spent some time in Taiwan. I have family in China. So I've been around East Asia, Southeast Asia. And in all of these places, ever since I was a kid, anime and manga have been super, super mainstream. So it's never really been regarded as like foreign, right? Like, I
Mhm.
mean, you know, like people know it's from Japan, but so part of it is the underlying culture. There's a lot of similarities. Like Thailand is a Buddhist country, Japan is pretty Buddhist. They're different sects of Buddhism. Like
Right. Yeah.
Thailand is Theravada
Theravada. Yeah.
Buddhism. Yeah,
Theravada, yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and Japan's more Mahayana Chan Buddhism, but there's underlying similar values. Chopstick eating cultures are going to have like similar values already.
Yeah.
And then, oh, sorry, hold on, got to turn off this alarm. Okay.
Oh, no problem. Everybody
so-
subscribe for that water faucet. I'm sure it's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, a part of it is just getting anime earlier. Just about everyone got anime earlier than America, actually, and I think a big
Yeah.
part of that is that America has such a powerful homegrown entertainment complex in Hollywood, and
Mhm.
it's been exporting that worldwide for so long. Whereas other places, even Europe, Middle East, they got a lot of anime, like in late '70s, early '80s. When I talk to friends from the Middle East, they'll know like Future Boy Conan or Mazinger, right? Like, so a lot of it is like other places just got it earlier, so it's just not regarded as foreign. But then you're talking about why is it that people just don't see cartoons as childish? So I mean, obviously, like there are otaku everywhere, and when people take it too far, like people are going to be like, "Oh man, like that's too much," right? So
Yeah.
there's going to be like people who take it too far. It's not as if like it's 100% like you're never going to be called like a nerd, but in general, I would say in Asia, like manga tends to be more mainstream. Especially in the 80s and 90s, like it was just really easy to just pick up a comic and read it, and it just wasn't weird. Like my dad bought me my first copy of Dragon Ball. I had no idea what it was. He saw it and he's like, "Oh, that's Sun Wukong. That's the Monkey King, right?" There's a common
Journey to the West.
folklore. Yeah, he was like, "Oh, I know what that is," and he bought it for me, and I loved it. I had like aunties that would recommend just random, really funny, sometimes
Wow.
not even age appropriate manga to me because they're like, "Oh, this is hilarious. You need to read this."
Yeah, this is a copy of Bible Black over here. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, not quite that bad, but I did read Crying Freeman way before I should have, but it was awesome. As a kid, you're like, "Oh my god, like this is amazing." So I think it's a combination. Really, it's accessibility. Like in Thailand, when I was a kid, everything was just bootlegged and it was super cheap and super accessible, and you could just buy it at every newsstand. So there was just no barrier to entry there. Anime was harder to get, right? Because you had to like buy it on tape or subscribe to some expensive satellite channel. The manga was like everywhere. So I think it's just number one is accessibility. Number two, I do think this is a generalization, but I think Asian cultures tend to be more relaxed about just letting people have their hobbies, like not like you just have your thing. You don't need like everyone to agree with your thing. Like a lot of people are happy just to have their thing on their own.
Well, I want to make sure that before Max goes, since right now it's 12:04, is there any final question you would want to ask Richmond?
Yes. You probably won't have any like, this is kind of a complicated question, so no problem if you can't answer it. But like, obviously, there are people in the West, we call them weebs because they're interested in Japan, and obviously there's the inverse, people who are interested in Japan in the East who are interested in the West. I'm just wondering, like, you and I have noticed this propensity to put like these really esoteric Western religious concepts into games. What was Xenogears? What with Silent Hill? What with all the anime that we mentioned before? I'm just wondering, like, if there's something beyond just a general interest in Western culture to that, like why it seems to be so ubiquitous in all these types of fiction that we're talking about.
I think what you said about Young is actually super relevant. I think people, when they have access to a lot of information, so I think creators, right? Let's talk about creators, not your average fan, but like the people creating this stuff. The creators that we like, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is highly curated, right? Like we're talking about the classics, right? So we're talking about a very narrow band of anime. Like there's some absolute like just brainless anime out there that
Sure.
would not stir our spirits. We're not talking about those. We're talking about the ones that are very artistic, but also fun. So I think those creators that we are drawn to, because we like a lot of the same stuff. Silent Hill, like Ghost in the Shell, these really thoughtful things. They're made by thoughtful people, and thoughtful people are curious about other cultures, right? You'll read about people from other cultures. You'll read about different religions, different mythologies, different philosophies, and then notably, like what you were saying about Young, you will notice like, oh, I can sort of tie this back to something from my own culture, or go, tie it back to something I feel deeply personally. So I think that's actually really natural. I think it's a natural consequence of going out and reading about the Bible, or reading about Gnosticism, and just relating it to your own experience. And I think like sometimes people call that like cultural appropriation, and I don't
Right.
think. And I think that, Lev, that's probably one of the things you were like referring to, right? Like, oh, you're not supposed to take stuff from other cultures. But I think if you're genuinely curious, you can do it in a meaningful way, and it'll just end up being respectful because
Well, that's been
you
all of
really relate
history.
to it.
I mean, that's been all of history. For example, we had a conversation recently about how the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, took so much of the Persian culture, so much of the Iranian culture. Heraclitus, for example, he was living in what was part of the Persian Empire at the time when he was formulating his philosophy. So this is, I think, how real growth happens. And the opposite of that would be having these very split apart circles that never interact with each other. But the other interesting thing before Max goes that I wanted to touch on is I mentioned when you were asking like which particular anime would I be interested in talking about today. The Gundam franchise, which is Zeka Tactics. Please look it up. I have it here on the board so you guys can see the beautiful designs. These are based off the Gundams in a way, but also another concept in the Gundam series, which I don't know if it's another anime as well. It's New Type. And there was even a magazine, I think it's still around, called New Type Magazine, which is a popular magazine about anime. The concept of a new type is you have, if I'm not mistaken, you have a person who goes away from the Earth and who, through the virtue of living in space, starts getting extrasensory abilities. So I'm just curious, Max, if you were aware of that particular concept. If I know that you were introduced to anime quite recently, but is this also a theme that you see recurring? People, when they disconnect from something that they've been in, like any kind of cycle, they start getting certain superpowers, if you will. They start seeing life in a different way, and it's almost like Gundam's point was that people would start developing this more and more and more, and in a way humanity is changing into something greater than it was before. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I'd say, well, the only two anime that I think I've watched that sort of approach that type of subject are Evangelion and Serial Experiments Lane.
Ooh,
I'm sure
Lane,
Yeah, I'm sure there are a bunch of other ones that do that, but I've yet to watch them. It's like, I mean, Ghost in the Shell does that as well, but I haven't actually watched Standalone Complex yet, even though I really want to. I've only seen the 2 movies that Oshi did. But yeah, that's definitely to Richmond's point. And thank you for answering my question, man. That there is this general interest that people like us are drawn to, which is sort of a heightening and enlightening of the human condition to try and transcend what we are now and to see which places we can go. And our interests seem to revolve around the same material. So I suppose because anime tends to focus more on those subjects in Western media, that's probably why. But yeah, I have to watch more. I'm anticipating, like, when I watch Standalone Complex and Ergo Proxy and all those types of animes, I'll be able to get that.
Another one that was mentioned right now by Buck Pucker, that's a funny name, is Gurren Lagann. So
Yeah, that's another one people have been recommending to me a lot. Yeah.
And in the way it
awesome
takes,
series, yeah.
and I'm not going to spoil the plot, but I don't think this does spoil the plot to say that it takes the concept of what you are able to also see in the Super Sentai series, which are Power Rangers for the people in the West, where you have or Gundam or Evangelion, where you have a human being that goes into the robot, and then the robot in Gurren Lagann goes into another robot and another robot and another robot and just starts growing like this Russian Matryoshka doll. And I find that to be a very fascinating concept in terms of looking at it through a spiritual lens, where in a way we are these multi-layered beings, and there is, you could say, like, the inner part of us, like, people refer to that as the third eye, or the heart, the heart chakra, that's sometimes being used as an example of it, like this inner core of who you are. And then you have all of these other layers, this armor, where you end up forging your identity through what you look like in an exterior sense. And I just find that to be a very interesting concept. And even the challenging of, I mean, this is the first episode, it's not going to spoil anything, where the main character there says that the entire heavens are against us. And it's this entire battle that's going to happen of these epic proportions. I don't really know what else I could say to that. This is not even a question. It's more of just a comment of how much you can stretch this need that I think humans have to prove themselves on the big stage and to develop all of these outward layers that, you could just say, oh, it's just fancy costumes. But there is something about it that I think, again, goes to the human need to validate themselves through self-improvement, through the satisfaction of knowing I did as much as I could, I put as much effort as I could into growing as a human being, and you could see the result of my growth. This is also why I think a lot of people online right now are starting to, well, not a lot, but some people online are starting to get into more fitness, eating better, living better, even if they don't have good role models for it.
Sunning their balls.
Yeah, sunning their balls. They want to strive to be this, like, human Gundam in a way. So, I don't know. That's all I got to say about that. And, Max, I know you have to go. I have a couple of questions.
Which, Max, you must move on from Young and go right to Rene Gunyan. You must read Gunyan.
Oh,
Max.
man.
How do you spell that?
How do you spell Gunyan?
Yeah.
Rene? Guenon. There you go. Oh, my God. We're gonna
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, this is going to be very bad.
Rene, he talks about a lot of
he's like the next esoteric step up from
yes, exactly. Well, he talks about perennialism, the idea that history is this cycle. We go through several different ages. We go through the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and the Metal Age. And that's another interesting thing, where some people would say that we're living in an age of prosperity. Other people would say that we're living in an age of spiritual bankruptcy. And as a result, we're living in the lowest of all the ages. I don't know if it's exactly like that. I think that people are just becoming too black-pilled by living in a lot of comfort, where they don't feel like they can strive as much as they would have been forced to strive in the past. And I am kind of curious, Richmond, from your perspective, and we don't just have to focus on anime, but I think anime is kind of a part and parcel of this as well. do you think that there was also something to the environment of Japan and the environments the people live in that make them gravitate towards certain things more than others? So, for example, Japan was a small, relatively isolated island, even though they did have influence from mainland China. Do you think that there was something about the environment and about the certain hurdles that the Japanese people had to go through where it does go hand in hand with the kind of content they ended up creating? Can any bridge be drawn there, you think?
Before you answer that question, I just want to say goodbye. I gotta go.
All right, Max, thank you so much for coming
Max.
in. Always a great pleasure.
Great.
Please check out Max Derrat's YouTube channel. Amazing content, looking at all of the deeper meanings of a lot of these various video games. Please check it out. You will not be disappointed. Max Derrat, one of my favorite guests of all time. Thank you so much, buddy, for coming in once again.
All right, bless you guys. Thanks for having me again. Richmond, good to meet you.
For the past 4 years on this
Yes, take care. So yes, I'm curious, Richmond. What do you make of this? Do you see a connection?
I mean, when you create something, like, you can't help but reflect something of your experience and your culture in there. That's such a huge question, but let me see. So you're talking about, what is it about the history of, like, Japan that sort of, like, is coming through the media?
History of Japan, culture of Japan, the kind of, let's say, pressure that Japanese people may have been under living in this kind of feudal environment. Like, do you see any connection between that and what ends up happening afterwards with anime and video games?
I'm actually gonna maybe come at it from a different angle. So I'm not a Japanese historian. I'm not Japanese, so I cannot speak authoritatively on the culture. But so a lot of what people respond to in anime and manga, like what we've been talking about, is like, like these stories about, like, effort and struggle and self-actualization, which is great. But I think those themes are present in every culture. Every culture has stories like that. I think what people are responding to in Japan is that they have a very long history of storytelling, actually, way before anime, right? The word manga is like hundreds of years old. It just means, like, irresponsible pictures. Japan.
Speaking of irresponsible pictures, so yeah.
So I think the reason they have such a sophisticated storytelling culture is that they had a culture of reading for leisure for a long time, because print was more widespread in East Asia earlier. The earliest mass printing is from China. It spread to the rest of East Asia, and then I'm generalizing a ton. But I think in the Western world, a lot of print was more academic, more religious, more, for the upper class. Whereas in Asia, East Asia, in China, in Japan, you had, like, a commercial leisure print culture. So people were reading novels for fun, and they were collecting essentially comics. A lot of these things were really similar to comics, very visual. They have, like, hundreds of years of that. So I think stuff that we associate with modern culture, modern pop culture, consuming commercial media, I think that's been around a bit longer in a relatable form in East Asia. That would be my theory there, because I think every culture actually has those desires for self-actualization and for that kind of story. And I think it's the storytelling actually is what people are relating to, the very sophisticated, very fun and engrossing storytelling. The way that it's told is the distinction there, even more than the message, I think.
Is there also some reason you think that a lot of even the expressions that we see, not even in anime, but in a lot of these old school Japanese prints, let me even see if I have certain examples of these, that while it is similar to, let's say, prints from China, for example, there is something in the faces, and again, I don't know if it's just my bias speaking here, but there is something in the faces that is very cartoon-like. And I don't know if that's the right phrase to use. For example, this print, I just found it online right now. So you have, for example, this very serious looking face of this gentleman over here, with the tiger. Let's see if I could zoom in on it. Yeah, so even something as simple as just having that mouth like that, there's something cartoon-like about that kind of thing.
It's super.
Yeah.
That's a hang-up print. That's a Muko hang-up print, right?
Yeah. No, it's Utagawa Kunimaru.
Yeah, but it's a woodcut print, though.
Yes.
Or is it an actual painting?
No, I think it is.
Yeah,
I think it is a print. But
yeah. Oh, yeah, I can tell.
Yeah. But I am curious, like, what do you make of these very cartoony facial expressions? Would there have been a reason for those?
So, first off, I think you can draw a direct line between modern manga and older Japanese art like that.
No
like
theater,
it's unbroken. I've sometimes heard people call it like Orientalism, like, oh, you can't relate to them, but like it's part of the culture. There's that aesthetic sensibility that's and it's I'm going to quote an actual Japanese person, like Hayao Miyazaki has written about this. If you he's got these great books. I have them back there. Starting Point is a collection of his essays, and then there was a follow-up, Turning Point, a really good collection of essays. He talks extensively about his aesthetic theory, and sometimes he gets into the difference between East and West. And one of the things he talks about is that he calls it basically like the chopstick eating cultures, right? They like Japan. It's their history of art is very line based, and he said Japan specifically. He said they culturally, like, they love line art. He said he was even tempted. He's tempted to say it might even be on like a biological level, but culturally they're really into line art. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said basically, like, in hundreds of years ago in Japan, they felt like they could express everything, the whole universe, through line art. It didn't need to be like photo real. It didn't need. They didn't care about like tone and exact realism
perspective.
as much.
No, well, that comes from China as well, which a lot of very ancient Japanese art comes from China, especially literati painting, where the whole purpose. I mean, tone and figure is very much purposefully vague and abstract, not in the Western sense, but it's part of it's very part of their deep cultural tradition. When it comes to line art, like in the West, it was very much like scofomato and various other techniques that were to replicate a three-dimensional plane, but they just have a different spatiality towards art than we do. And that's why, like, for example, to do the hair on a mukuhanga is like it takes immense skill to get those thin lines with the hanga knife, right? Like, I mean, but they just have a different relation to space and to aesthetic sensibility than we do. Because here it's very much like the presence, the sort of the sort of full embodiment of realism, of high realism. It has to be like, it has to be a replication of three-dimensional space. Whereas there, they don't have that same like approach to it. They have a very different nuance towards what an aesthetic picture is, right? They have a different relation to space in general. So.
Well, there was a study, I recall, I don't recall which one, where, and I don't think it was just with Japanese people, but people from East Asia, they were shown in an aquarium scene, and they were asked, like, what are some of the things that you notice? And when they had Western people who were commenting on the aquarium scene, they were primarily talking about the fish. But a lot of the answers from people of, from Asia was the entire scene, like the things in the background, how those interact with the fish. And I don't know if that was just just like a selective, like, small study. But Richmond, do you also notice, like, even in Thailand, for example, or in China, do you notice there may be a different way that the world is seen through an artistic lens?
I mean, people just have different general aesthetic sensibilities, and you could see that reflected in traditional art and pop art. And I think nowadays things are everything's so cross-pollinated from a young age. Like, everyone's already online, so they get to see stuff from everywhere. Yeah, that's really interesting what you said about that. The people observing different things, having a different focus. If I could tie it to classical art, I would say like a good example I think that's relevant to this conversation would be in China. A lot of the landscape painting, it has a tradition of so Chinese landscapes are very highly abstracted, and they're big, and they it's not about like the photorealism of a certain shot. A lot of the landscape, you're actually supposed to imagine yourself walking through it. So you just kind of go through like one part at a time, right? And so there's this tradition. It's almost like a video game. It's the ancient equivalent of like, hey, here's a new level. Have you seen this new level of like, take a look at this scroll, right? And then people have fun just like imagining themselves going through that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the concepts comes from Taoism as well. Yeah. Well, like it comes from the concept of Taoism where the landscape has to have what they call like a free play of the landscape itself. Like there's something that like the vanishing point is purposefully diminished because like so in the West what they'll do like a lot of from the Renaissance onwards, right around the time landscape painting became its own thing, like you'll take like studies or you'll go and do plein air where you'll directly like try to mimic the landscape. But from when I studied when it comes to literati painting, you're very much like you experience the landscape of a particular scene, but you don't really focus on trying to replicate like this is where that tree was on Mount Longhu. Like it's very much like it's imaginative for a reason, because a lot of this art comes from spiritual practices. They don't consider it as like an aesthetic, like individual work of art. You know what I mean? Like it's very much integral to their whole religious and philosophic traditions.
Well, would it be similar, by the way, to this Buddhist?
Buddhist
print?
tapestries. Yes, yeah.
So over here, this is an example of one of their trees here, and we have all of these individual deities as well as monks, from what I understand, who have ascended to this higher plane of existence. And I do see this also as being kind of like a video game level, where you get to see all these different...
God.
And then you have also... what I really like about these works is you also have like these little animals down in the bottom. People don't really pay that much attention to them, but this is kind of like the first level over here, where you have all these animals and people who are praying, and then...
a lot of Buddhism, like in Mahayana, like a lot of it, they incorporated like some of the like indigenous practices of like countries like Taiwan and Vietnam and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've incorporated a lot of their own mythologies. So you'll have like a lot of weird like the Buddha next to a snake being.
Yeah, or Garuda, for example. That bird.
Garudas, yeah.
The bird. And that's pretty popular in Thailand, right?
Yeah, Garudas, Nagas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting, like a lot of these various traditions, they all seem to be very animistic. I'm imagining, for example, a lot of these shamans back in the day before Buddhism was introduced, that would have been something. I mean, you could see that everywhere. You could see that in India. You could see that in Africa. You could see it all around the world. If we're talking about like the most, closest to nature type of traditions, they all involve some aspect of animism. And then, for example, in Japan, you would have Shintoism, which is, I'd say, very, very close to this animist religion. But what's also interesting for me is when we take a look at the uniforms, for example, like the Japanese emperor, for example, Hirohito, the uniform that he wore, let's see if I could put an image of it here, was almost like it was almost like an Evangelion angel, if that makes any sense. I don't know, Richmond, if you would follow me on this on this trajectory here, but it is something that I've noticed, like these uniforms, and I think in China they also have similar aesthetics as well for like the imperial uniforms. But if I'm looking at this example over here, you have the imperial couple, and they're very abstracted, the kind of shapes that they're in. They're no longer in a human form. In a way, they've ascended beyond the mere human form into kind of like this godlike abstract pattern. So I don't know exactly what the origin of that is, but I think
that comes from the same tradition, because they don't have like the same relation to like the full presence of the figure, like because from what I studied at university, like they in China especially, they don't they don't find like the full like, for example, the nude in Western art. Like they don't have the same well, I mean, well, not nowadays with anime, but like, you know what I mean, they don't have the same they don't consider beauty to be something that is full presence. There has to be a level of concealment there. Like, for example, a lot of the figures in ink paintings, they have some article of clothing, or they look almost like very like alien. Like the closest in the West you could get is like a Chauvenet portrait, but like they don't have yeah, they don't consider like the full nude. Like they don't have the same tradition around it like that we do. Like whereas the nude becomes in the Occidental mind is like the height of aesthetic beauty. Like they have a different relationship to it.
Mm.
Of course, nowadays with the anime, I mean, because well, nudity is everywhere.
Yeah.
Let's face it.
Well,
Like,
Richmond, would
yeah.
you agree with Gio's statement there that there's a different concept of nudity, or no?
Sort of. I mean, I think like a lot of the Western exaltation of the nude body could be traced back to like Greek Hellenistic cultures.
Mhm.
But then, interestingly, in Asia, like say in Buddhism, you do have like some statuary that is like very human figure oriented, and that comes from the Kushan Empire, and they extended their empire into like the Greek lands, and they picked up a love of like statuary from there. So actually, a lot of the earliest we're talking about cultural exchange. A lot of the earliest Buddhist statuary was somewhat Greek influenced by way of the Kushan Empire, and in those you do see like these like muscular figures and these like voluptuous women, and I mean like yeah. And as far as like the clothing and stuff, I mean that's really interesting. Like the idea of transcending and sort of like being beyond human for like this leader. Don't you think you see that in Western culture too, though? Like the Pope is dressed very similarly.
Sure,
the tall hat and the.
Well, I'd go even further and say that there are smaller level examples of that, even in the outfit I was showing before that Trey's Kushranada was wearing. So if I go back to Trey's over here, what I notice is that he is like a flower man. What I mean by that is you have these pauldrons, these golden pauldrons that are extending from him as if he is a flower, and these are like the leaves or the petals that are extending out of him. And same thing with this diamond shape over here, like the crest, kind of like a bird would have like this crest on its chest, or again, like a flower. It's like a flower petal that's coming out. Same thing with this little whatever that thing is. So I see that in the aesthetics of any, 17th century, 18th century European ballroom outfit. You have the sense that the people are like flowers. I mean, women, they have the, those frilly dresses that go down. They are also very flower-like. And you get the sense that they're like in this hall with these columns, and the columns are like the trees, and the upper portion, it's so tall, it's like the sky, and they're like the flowers among the trees in the forest, and they're dancing. So it's like there's this whole thing that's going on where it kind of sucks that today everything's done more for comfort. I mean, I'm wearing a t-shirt, you're wearing a t-shirt, Gio's wearing a t-shirt, and you've got a nice t-shirt, Street Fighter. I mean, that's high class. But still, like, imagine if we were wearing the top hats and the fancy outfits. I wonder, like, how much does that change people's perception of reality when they just go out? Or even for people who are, let's say, of a more peasant environment, they would also wear certain traditional garbs, and they would be used to seeing, like the Dutch people would see other people wearing clogs or whatever. I don't know. Or the Norwegians with their style. Like, how much do you think this holds value, or do you think we're making too big of a deal out of it, and we don't need to bother putting on these airs anymore, since we could just get this from the internet? Do you see, like, how valuable would you estimate this aesthetic sense to be if it if it's not here anymore, other than in just like fancy get-togethers? Do you see a value that's being lost, that we don't have this in real life anymore, basically?
I don't know if it is being lost in real life, because I think people always enjoy dressing up, right? I mean, even if you don't. I don't wear a suit to work every day, but eventually I might have to go to a wedding or a speaking event, and I might, dress up nicer, right? Like,
Yeah, but even the suit, it seems like the suit, and don't get me wrong, obviously there's a whole culture among suits, like fine tailoring and all that. But even the suit, in comparison to Trey's Cushionat over here, it seems to be almost like a downgrade of the floweriness. And
oh, yeah,
know,
okay.
and maybe
They
that.
don't go like at that level. Right?
Yes, exactly. And if you notice, like in history, people did put on so many of this flowery nature kind of clothing on them for all these centuries, and it's just been like slimmed down, and it's been, made a lot more subtle. And again, maybe that's just because of modernity, convenience. But do you see anything lost here, or do you think it is possible to have like a nice, sleek, suit, and that would be enough?
So I don't personally like bemoan the loss of the standard of having to dress up in like an elaborate outfit. And the reason I don't is because people will, if they have that desire, they can dive into that, right? Like I've seen in China right now, a lot of people are rediscovering traditional dress, right? Because during the Cultural Revolution, a lot of this stuff like was not, it was looked down upon. They were going
Yeah.
around destroying temples, but now a lot of young people, they feel like, oh, like there's something missing in our lives. We actually want to get into this,
Hmm.
and in fact, some of them look to Japan for inspiration, just because they're like, people there still wear kimonos when they feel like it, right? And like, why don't we wear our traditional clothes, right? And then I could say, like in Thailand, in a lot of Thai schools, on Fridays they will encourage kids to dress up in whatever their traditional garb is. So because Thailand can be pretty international now, so Thai kids might dress up in a traditional Thai outfit. Chinese kids will dress up in theirs. Um, I Americans can be a cowboy. I don't know. But, you can dress however you like, as it reflects your culture.
Yeah. Well, Internet Friend says here and by the way, need those super chats, everybody. Internet Friend said, and please, Richmond, let me know how you are doing on time as well, because I want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
But
I got a little more time. Yeah.
So, Internet Friend says it's expensive. A cheap cosplay of that outfit would look atrocious. I mean,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that is
It
true.
is.
Oh, and also
It is cost prohibitive. That's true.
another example here I have of let's see. So these are the Japanese emperor couple, and here I have a Japanese temple, and I noticed something very similar. Like when I go back and forth from one to the other, like these sloping designs over here on the temple in comparison to the outfit here, there is like this need to go. And again, it's like it's close to what you were saying with European culture as well, but it still seems to be very different as well, as far as you're not just becoming a flower person, but now you're just becoming, again, like an Evangelion angel, like some very abstract but still aesthetically pleasing shape. And that's what I've always been curious about, because it's in harmony with nature, like this temple, for instance, but it's a very different quality of harmony than, let's say, a Roman temple. Where Roman temple, for example, they would, and Gio, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it would, for example, in the columns, kind of emulate like this tree with like the leaves and the natural growth. Like there is an emulation of nature going on here, while this, it almost exists in the DMT land. It's almost like its own dimension. And I don't know, like, could we trace again like certain ways that these cultures have developed with why exactly it looks like this kind of abstraction as opposed to this more nature-based abstraction?
I mean, there's always logic to it, right? For instance, Islamic architecture. There's some amazing examples of it, and the cultures, they had very, very advanced math, right? They really innovated on math, and also they didn't really. I'm not an authority, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they didn't want to depict their holy figures too literally.
Yeah.
Right? So
you couldn't. You couldn't depict any human form
so
at all.
Aniconism created like the abstractions that we see within Islamic art. Yeah. Because they had to resist the using figures.
Yeah. But then that developed into this concept of like finding God through like geometry, through math, through these really amazing patterns. And so, you had some cultural rules, and then people went deeper into it and really found meaning in that. And I know like with Chinese style, because I think it's fair to say Japanese style architecture is very Chinese influenced. Chinese culture has a lot of rules about like what will bring you good fortune. So like the sloping roofs, for instance, it's all about they don't like hard angles, right? Because that could attract bad luck. The idea with the slope is like it deflects things. And then from a practical purpose, maybe at some point it is rooted in sort of early on, a long time ago, someone just discovered, hey, this shape is just good for like letting the rain run off, right? So, and then over time that developed into like, oh, this is good for good luck, right? Like there's always some root. There's often like some practical thing or some social thing, and then it turns into like a deep aesthetic thing.
And I have a tweet actually, Lev, from our good friend Adam Lair, the art critic. He said that it's relevant. He said Miyazaki is the Beckett of AAA gaming. Fragmented and disorientating narratives, bleak and absurd, extremely challenging, even more rewarding. I don't talk much about games, but Elden Ring is the final argument in the case made for video games as art. It is indisputably art. I disagree. I don't know. I mean, lacks the aura, but what is this Elden Ring? Like, people have been going crazy.
Elden Ring, yeah, Richmond.
Elden Ring.
What do you know about this Elden Ring business?
Oh gosh, I know as much as someone who hasn't played it yet. So
all right, then
we can skip it. I want to show you another example though of something of a similar nature where you may not expect it as much. So this is a porch ceiling. I believe this is in Charleston, South Carolina, and you notice this particular blue color. So as I was reading about the origin of this, the painted blue porch ceiling started in the American South around 200 years ago. The practice traces back to the Gullah Geechee, enslaved people living in the low country of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. Gullah folklore explains that ghosts, also referred to as haints, were not able to cross water. In order to repel evil spirits from plantations, porch ceilings were painted a soft blue. The blue was meant to mimic water in an effort to keep haints or spirits at bay. So there we go. Like, that's another example of these very kind of like spiritually practical things that we don't really think about that look good as well. I mean, that is another thing I'm curious about. Like you even though you're in Thailand right now, you mentioned your father or mother came from Taiwan.
But my mother grew up in Taiwan. Yeah.
Yes, so your mom grew up in Taiwan, and Taiwan had a different trajectory, obviously, with Chiang Kai-shek and all that, than China did with communism. Do you notice that there was a continuation of some of the OG Chinese traditions going on there, that China, like maybe China's catching up to that right now, like you mentioned with the outfits?
Yeah. So my family on my father's side ended up in Thailand rather than Taiwan, and they've carried on a lot of very old customs that people in China probably don't do anymore. Like we celebrate a lot of the old Confucian holidays, and my family still does blood sacrifices of chickens on holidays. We'll kill a chicken, we'll eat it. Like it's not. There's nothing menacing about it. There's an old tradition of taking a chicken on these holidays, and you cut its throat and you drain it, and you put its blood in a container, and you offer it up to the land god and your ancestors, and then you cook everything and you eat everything. And so like that's a custom that my family kept, and it's I imagine something that people in my family have been doing for hundreds of years, and it's really cool to have that passed on and to be able to just to keep up that tradition. And that's like something that most people say in Shanghai like probably do not do anymore for practical reasons and other reasons.
And my people as well, they have, the Hasidic side of my people, the Jews, well, on my mom's side, they have a much worse way of handling the chickens, which I do not approve of, where, like in certain religious holidays, they spin the chicken around beforehand.
Spin?
They spin the chicken around. And I don't know why. It's weird. I don't like it. I wish it would stop. But going back, though, to these various traditions here, what do you think is going on with this, let's say, this sense of tradition, not just in, well, let's continue what our ancestors were doing, but in any kind of spiritual satisfaction that you may have? Like, do you sense that the spiritual aspect is still there, or is it just more, oh, this is just what we do and we're used to it and it's fun? Like, do you end up in any way getting spiritually closer with your family or community through participating in these rituals?
I think that depends on the person, but I do think if you do it long enough, you eventually come back to that. Like if you keep doing it and it becomes ritualized, like you can't help but eventually like just kind of feel something for it. This is if you don't give it up. A lot of people might get fed up with it, they don't do it. But if you keep doing it, there's something, I don't know, there's like a comfort in there that it's like, hey, I'm doing something my ancestors have done for a really long time. And you start thinking about, oh, why do they do this? You know, what is the purpose of it? And I think it's kind of comforting because in a very literal sense, these rituals allow you to connect to all the people that you literally, literally, physically are descended from. And that's really nice to think about, to think that like, oh, I'm continuing something through the ages. And yeah.
I want to show you this book over here. I have Hidden Meanings in Chinese Art. So this one has a lot of all these various examples of what all of these objects mean. And in a way, I see it like internet memes as well, where you would have all these different things packed into a single image that people that know about that image can resonate with it. And I have another question, just as kind of a sidebar. I have a question about Confucianism that I was wondering about. So even though Confucianism today, you could say that it's used by the communist Chinese for their own, top-down governmental ends, there was something I recall hearing about Confucianism that loyalty is primarily towards the father to such an extent that if the father were to commit some kind of crime against the state, it would still be correct in terms of Confucianism for the son to hide the father from the government or defend the father, from whatever the government may do. Is that correct?
I don't know if that's technically correct, but I think that's very much in the spirit of Confucianism as I've lived it. Yes. Yeah. You exalt the father figure, I would say even above the state, above everything. Yeah. But that's generally how it goes. Yeah.
And when it comes to these traditions, this kind of goes full circle to what we were talking about in the very beginning. Since we understand that, we're living in a very, very much liberal time today, where, at least in the modern world, where people have more of a choice of what do you do with your life? Do you go into anime? Do you develop video games? Do you whatever? The thing that people bring up who don't want life to go into the direction of just complete societal breakdown, and I don't think it will, but the people who see this quality of we have so much resources now, we have so much comfort that people don't need to do certain things they had to do in the past to survive. So some of them, like yourself, will be very passionate about pursuing a certain art form and create a beautiful video game. But most people, maybe they'll just be so lazy that they're not going to do anything since there's no pressure for them to do it. And I know this goes a little bit beyond the question of anime, which I think does play a role in encouraging people to strive towards greatness. But just away from that for a second, do you see a similar concern now that I bring that up, just societal-wide, or do you think it's overblown?
I don't think it's overblown. I think it's a great question. I mean, we're living in an age where potentially everyone could have their basic needs met. There's enough food to go around the world. But okay, so that's a big question. Um, there was a really good essay by one of the cracked.com writers ages ago. I forget his name. He had like a Chinese sounding pseudonym, but he wrote this really good essay. It ended up being an argument for universal basic income. And I thought he came at it from a really interesting perspective, which was that in the past, people had to work. Everyone had to work in society to keep things moving so that you could stay fed. The roads are paved. Like just getting food was such a big deal, right? Like even after industrialization, even then it's an even bigger deal. Like you gotta industrialize the farms because now you got to feed like tens of hundreds of millions of people, and so a lot of that is automated now, and it's more and more things are going to be automated. So in the past, you had to do a job that had a purpose, and now basically like we exist to spend money on things, right? Just functionally, and
Mass
there's
consumerism.
yeah, and that's what keeps the system going. And once you realize that, that's very like spiritually disenchanting. But for me personally, like okay, so bringing it back to what I believe personally, I don't necessarily think laziness is like a bad thing. I think it can sometimes be a virtue. Like when you talk to programmers or mathematicians, which are very difficult, very intellectual fields, some of the smartest people I know, they're like, no, laziness is a virtue because you want to find the simplest solution. And that's the best solution is always the simplest solution. So you work hard until you find that. And then after that, you can be lazy again. And I think that's actually not such a bad way of living.
I think for the few people, there's probably people who can handle it. I mean, every society up until recently had a sort of aristocratic class that had the ability to pursue more artistic, philosophic, and engineering feats. Because nowadays, of course, like everyone is sort of homogenized within like the typical, like North American, like residual of the Protestant work ethic, where it's like work becomes like a lifestyle almost. But I mean, the problem is, I think like the nightmare is that if UBI was everywhere, then we would end up instead of like some like glorious, like it's in a lot of anime, like some like glorious like cyberpunk type of future. I think like you'd have like bug pods where like people eat like soy protein.
Well,
or whatever.
there's an example of that in the Xenogears, and again, I don't want to.
There is.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it, but there was a segment in Xenogears where in this particular location. Well, Richmond, you've played Xenogears, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you remember in that particular location, which was very advanced, there were these people who were living inside of these like hexagon-shaped pods, and if they didn't do something correctly, I guess this is kind of like a China-style social credit system, they would be dispensed with. I don't know if you recall, they would be deleted. I don't remember the exact word here, but that is kind of the menacing thing that I think people anticipate, that with the rise of technology, with the rise of people not having a tradition to defend, not having as much of a reason to keep going, they'll be much more pliable by some kind of a technocratic state that would enslave their minds and force them into repeating certain patterns and obeying this higher authority, not because they see any kind of value in it, but because this is the only thing that they know. So making people dumber, making people more programmable, like, erasing the humanity from a person and turning them into more of a robot person, if that makes sense.
Sure, but I feel like it's easier. The only way to do that to people is if their basic needs aren't met, and they fall in line out of necessity, right? I think it's less of a spiritual thing, more of like a material thing in real life instances where that has happened. Whereas I think that sort of the spiritual degradation that people talk about, to me, that's just like, that's one of the paths you can take when you do have your needs met, and you're not worrying about how am I going to put food on the table. Now you're worrying about higher level things like, oh, what is my purpose? What will give my life meaning? And if you don't find that thing, then yeah, you could fall into spiritual despair. And in the past, people maybe kind of already had something, like they had their their religion or whatever, that but sorry, I'm rambling.
No. That's
Yeah.
that's Gio's line, by the way. No, but that was really well said. I would say though that for people who grow up with a lot of comfort, like I'm looking at young people today, like 4-year-old kids who are addicted to the iPad already. The parents shove the iPad in their faces, and we still don't know what the ramifications of that is. So I like the fact that there are a lot of creative games out there. I think creative games inspire people, and I think your game is definitely going to be an inspiration for a lot of people. Speaking of
Thank you.
which, by the way, Zeka Tactics, at Zeka Tactics, check it out. And at the same time, though, there are a lot of really crappy examples of media out there. Like, you remember the whole Elsa Gate situation that occurred on YouTube, where they had a lot of these very bright colored things, but showing horrible depictions of
Yeah.
needles and pregnancies and whatever. Anyway, even though that stuff's been cleaned off of YouTube, the aesthetic is still there. If you look at the videos that are garnering, millions, stupid amounts of views, these are videos that have these very bright colors in their thumbnails and in how they present things, bright yellow, bright purple. You know what I mean? Like it's the anti-Japanese aesthetic, because like in the Japanese aesthetic, for example, like you have nice. Like, look at these colors. Isn't this like a nice color combination here with these subtle yellows and oranges? I think it trains the eye to appreciate subtlety, and that does the opposite, like the Elsa Gate stuff.
I would say those videos are literally just anti-art because the way they are made is people just they just look up what are the trending terms, right? And then they just film that. And so it's almost like this amazing collective performance piece, this incredibly nihilistic art performance that people are participating in willingly, where they're literally just following an algorithm. The algorithm is saying Spider-Man, pregnancy, needles, and then they're like, okay, we just put those things in a video, right? And they're just doing it unironically. They're just like, I'm gonna put these in a video and kids are gonna click on it. They have no idea what they're watching, but I'm gonna get millions of clicks and I'll make like a couple bucks.
Well, that's definitely a big part of it.
There's some conspiracies about some pizza-related activity going on.
Well, another part of it is going to be, don't you start, Gio. Another part of it is going to be, for example, the TikTok videos. I'm noticing that people are just behaving like robots on this platform, with these very, stereotypical dances and
song becomes
So that's kind of like, I don't know if you would call that spiritual enslavement, but it seems to me like if a person grows up and that's all they know and that's all they're used to, they will be much easier to control by some kind of an algorithm, when they start going into their formative years and when they're adults, and how that starts shaping reality. And in a way, kind of like how I see it is, we may turn anime into real life, in the sense of there may be a future spiritual battle going on with people who grew up with certain things that they resonate with, and other people who just become kind of like
now
this
I just
hive
imagine
mind.
saying like, "Oh my God, we're gonna live my favorite anime." When we have the Elon Musk Neuralink in the future.
No, but life does seem to be almost like sci-fi now, when we have these things that people just talked about in their fantasies.
A very shitty version of it.
Yeah, now coming true.
Well, okay, so going back to TikTok, I'm not super worried because you do see like some genuinely funny stuff on there, right? Like I've seen some like 10-second clips that tell a whole story, and they're hilarious. So
True.
I think it's like anything else, where like any medium, no matter what, any broad commercial medium, like 90% of it is not going to be very good, and then like some small percent of it, like people, eventually someone is going to like put some quality stuff on there. Like, so with TikTok, you have like billions of people now with their phones, and out of that, like in the past, a phone would be a camera would be very expensive, but nowadays almost everyone, like probably half the global population, will have access to a camera phone at some point in their life from now on, right? And now you have people like just figuring out how to do films and getting pretty creative with it, actually. So I'm not super worried yet, just because like I have my own nieces and nephews, and I know like I can direct them towards like better stuff, right? Like I don't just their parents don't just sit them in front of YouTube and let the algorithms babysit them. We can show them stuff, be like, hey, this is cool, this is educational, or this is interesting. And I think there will always be people passing that on, right? Like I'll show them stuff I like, right? That's very natural. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people do leave the babysitting up to YouTube, but that's the same as like latchkey kids with TV, right?
Yeah, but I guess the difference would be that TV, or at least TV back in the day, even though there was a lot of schlock on it, you still had certain standards. For example, the late night shows, Johnny Carson, things of that nature. There was still a certain level there. You wouldn't have like the Kardashians on or something like that. That's number one. Number two would be that even before that, before the TV, you would have kids who were bored. And boredom, like I said in earlier streams, this is something that Bill Maher talked about with Adam Carolla, how influential being bored was, where you talked about the positive side of being lazy, which I agree with you on. Being bored is very crucial, I think, because it helps stimulate creativity instead of having creativity be done for you. So that is something that may come up where I agree with you. There's a lot of creative things on TikTok as any medium. People will embrace a medium and a small percentage will do a lot with it. But to kind of counter what you were saying, back then, people would have a limited amount of things to spend their time on, and it would have been curated by, let's say, movies. They would have come out, from these Hollywood moguls, like Wizard of Oz or whatever, that did curate their content to be of a certain aesthetic and of a certain level that's high up there.
Sure.
And if not that, then kids would spend their time playing with the goat, or just playing with sticks outside, or in the case of the creator of Pokemon, collecting these beetles and insects in his backyard. So in a way, like, you wouldn't have had all these other things affecting people. And it's an open question for me about how this is going to affect kids who are going to be growing up now, where they don't have the opportunity to be bored, they don't have the opportunity to discover things like they would have in the past, and what kind of society that would create. While on the other hand, to be a little bit positive here, you have never had a time ever where you have access to as much information, where if you have the willpower to do so, you will discover things that philosophers in the past would have only dreamed of being able to uncover. They would have had to go to the Library of Alexandria. They would have had to make an epic voyage in order to get a certain piece of information. And now, so good, LibGen, you would be able to get it incredibly quickly and be able to get to a higher level of understanding. So that I find to be a very fascinating thing in terms of how society is going to look from that. I just find it to be very fascinating, both for good or ill. So before my last question, just about the production aspects of your video game, what do you make of that? Any predictions given what I just said right now, Richmond?
Sure. So I just thought of something. Let me do some armchair psychoanalysis. Have you noticed that people are really into liminal spaces right now? Right. That's been like a thing, right?
That's huge.
Right? Like, it's huge. A lot of horror based around liminal spaces, right? So what are liminal spaces? They're these transitional spaces, right? Like hallways, a subway station, like places you're not supposed to stay, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and that's where the horror is derived, right? Being stuck in this transitional space, and people have said like, oh, it's scary because you're not supposed to stay there. I think maybe liminal spaces are such a big thing now because of what you said about boredom. Those are the spaces where people are most likely to get bored and suddenly be alone with their thoughts, right? Because like you can't stare at your phone while you're walking through the hallway. You're gonna trip. You're gonna bump into someone. Like,
I know. I've seen some people
pay a little bit of it.
Read The Non-Place by the French philosopher Marc Aug. This is where the liminal space, the term non-place, comes from. But also, I think a lot of the liminal space stuff has to do with like very particular, like growing up in North America, millennial nostalgia. That's like usually. Like a lot of the image comps, they come from like this weird mix of your childhood being influenced by non-places, which are meant for like public use and utility, that don't have what Heidegger calls dwelling. Like, doesn't have like a specific context. So it's like this weird mix of like nostalgia the horror of the unknown. Like the back rooms is like the best example, because like you have the ones where it's like there's a monster or whatever, but that's bullshit. The real back rooms, the real horrible ones, are the ones where it goes on forever, because it's like that unknowing, right? So and then they have like the infinity pool ones that's popular now, but like
there's a game about that.
Yeah. So like nowadays, I think that's why like there's something very, like, you're right that there's something very particular about why nowadays it's become so popular. And maybe it does have something to do with like people being more atomized or whatever. Like we find comfort in it in some like very strange way. But yeah. Oh, my friend, internet friend in the comments, is Zeller's a liminal space? Yes, Zeller's unfortunately is a liminal space. For those who don't know, Zeller's was a very popular like middle range store in Canada here, and unfortunately they've been totally destroyed. They've been gutted. So Zeller's liminal space. My childhood is gone, erased. No longer.
Rest in peace, Geo's
mass
childhood.
hallways without stock, and in the front of every store they had the claw machine. So no, I can hear the caretakers in the background.
Oh man, that's so sad. For me, the liminal space was probably Mount Airy Lodge, where I went to as a kid. There was this hotel in the Pocono Mountains, and and I still have dreams where I revisit this place, as well as revisiting Annecy. Another limited space was liminal space was the walkway where you have the town over here and the mountains over there, the Alps, where you could just see this, beautiful river and the beautiful lake and the Alps in the distance while walking there. And when I revisit it in the form of being both that as well as a beach where people are hanging out. And beaches are also influential liminal spaces. You would have, for example, in that Hideo Kojima game, what's the name? Death Stranding.
Death Stranding.
Yeah, the beach was considered to be like that transitionary place between life and death, between our world and the dreamscape. So I'm into that as well. But anyway, I have a final question for you, Richmond, about the actual nitty-gritty production of making a video game.
Sure.
How long have you been making Zeta Tactics? How many people are working on it? And what does it really take to put all of this together? So yeah, I would just love to know a little bit more about this.
Oh man. So we've actually been working on Zeta Tactics for a little over a year. We announced it. Gosh, I don't even remember. My brain is muddled from just the months rolled together. So okay, so the thing about my company, BitEgg, it's we have two tracks, right? So we actually do a lot of art and animation outsourcing. So we do a lot of contract work for other companies. So we've worked on some notable games like Indivisible, the Shantae games. We specialize in a lot of like cartoony, the anime influenced games. That's been our niche. But we do all sorts of stuff. So that has been primarily our main source of income. But because of that, we're able to have a long runway for our own game development. And that's why we've been able to slowly work on this game in between projects. So it's very difficult for me to project out like how much time we've spent on it, just because it's been so piecemeal. But in the last 6 months, we have actually had a consistent team of about like 8 people actually consistently working on it, designing it, coding it, doing the art. We're at the point where we're actually doing the 3D graphics, putting them into Unity, building the vertical slice. So I would say hopefully by the end of this year, I think we'll actually have that vertical slice demo. It would go a lot faster if we could focus just 100% on the game, but we got to keep the lights on, so we do a lot of client work. But hopefully when this game comes out, it'll be successful, and that'll be a new revenue stream that, where we can keep spend even more time on original game development.
And these enemies are really beautiful. They remind me a bit of the Zakus, but they are also reminding me of Mega Man Legends for some reason. I don't know.
You have a good eye.
Yeah.
So I love both those things. The Zaku is just such like a cool mobile suit. Sort of one of the unspoken rules in our game is that I love grunt units. So the aesthetic of the game is sort of it's a love letter to the grunt unit. So none of the units you get in this game will look like the traditional hero units, like the Gundam. It's all about the grunts, like the Zakus, the Scope Dogs, right? Like I just love how they have a certain scruffy feeling to them. They feel like they're the underdog, and you kind of root for them that way. And then the boss characters in our game will look more like your traditional heroic, like Gundam units. Yeah, so and then that sort of fits with the theme in our game about sort of being like the underdog and putting together your group and making your way up through the world. So that was a big inspiration. And then Mega Man Legends is just such a beautiful game. I think it's the most beautiful of the low polygon PS1 era 3D games. And the reason it looks so good is that they totally embrace the limits of the system. So where other people were trying to do complex real-time lighting on a very limited hardware, they were just like, we're not even going to do lighting, right? There's no real-time lighting. Everything's baked into the textures. But because of that, it's super controlled. Everything is very intentional. So that game is essentially like 3D pixel art, down to like they did tricks like they would mask out the character from the side. They would mask out their mouth into like this complex, anime mouth shape. But it was just like a trick of the texture. It wasn't the geometry, and it only worked from that one angle. And which is interesting is that they're starting to do stuff like that again in modern CG. In a lot of anime stuff like Spider-Verse, where they're very much trying to make it look super 2D again. Ben, I would say like this game is an early pioneer of like trying to make 3D that doesn't really look 3D. They're not going for realism at all on super limited hardware, and that was a big inspiration for us. And then our mecha designer, our main lead designer, is actually a Japanese mecha designer. His name's Shinya Mizuno. Awesome artist, and his aesthetic is very cute, very Mega Man Legends-esque. And I've been a huge fan of his work for a long time. Please look him up on Twitter. He's super nice, really nice guy. His feed is like very, very wholesome. You don't have to worry about seeing any adult content by accident or anything if you have kids or whatever. But he does really cute work, and but we're asking him to do more like of these traditionally more like grim, like quasi-real units. And the reason for that is I just really like his aesthetic, and I think why our game has a unique aesthetic while you're feeling that Mega Man Legends plus the Zaku is because of this guy Shinya Mizuno. When we ask him to do something very serious, he can't help but make it a little bit cute, and I love that, and that is exactly why like he's our lead. He brings that little bit of cuteness and that extra like charm to it that I think other people wouldn't.
And how do you familiarize yourself with mecha art? Because from what I understand, there's that one famous one. There's a lot of YouTube videos. I think his name's June something. Do you just take already existing mechanical features and then sort of build upon it and imagine it? Like, it seems that it's a very particular style, like mecha art. Like it's got, yeah.
Oh, it's so broad though. I mean, certainly like you can look at something and kind of immediately tell if it is like a Japanese mecha or like Hollywood, North America. Like you can look at Avatar and you're like, that looks American for some reason. Right?
Yeah.
And then the thing you have on the screen here, you're like, that looks Japanese for some reason.
Or like the Transformers series, the early one was was Japanese designs, from what I understand. The original Transformers robots, which Mattel then bought, and the later one, Michael Bay, that one does not look Japanese at all. Like it's too,
Nope.
Yeah.
But then when you get to the Bumblebee movie, it goes back to that original aesthetic because that director grew up loving the original series. And actually, a lot of the artists I know for a fact, a lot of the artists that worked on the Michael Bay movies, they wished it looked more like the source. It was actually Michael Bay that kind of hated the cartoon. He actually didn't like the cartoon. He's like, this cartoon's like stupid. I'm gonna make it for
American consumer.
Boys.
Yeah. But like they almost like they're very inspired by like military regalia, but like they almost like defy like the uniformity of military hardware, which I think there's like when you look at mechas, they're very like interesting combinations and they're very unique and like each having like their own individual aesthetic, even though they're like battle bots essentially, right? Like that's
Yeah.
it's very interesting.
I think so there's one artist. Give me a second. I need to look up his name. He was the mecha designer behind Steel Battalion. Sorry, his name escapes me right now. I'm really bad with names. Junji Okubo. He's a really good mecha designer. He's really good at doing like super realistic mecha. Like you would think they were just actual industrial robots because that he loves industrial, practical looking robots. But he's got a great book out called Industrial Divinities. And he did a really good essay when people asked him like, oh, what is it about mecha? Like, why is it so special? What do people like about it? And he had an awesome answer. This is the answer I'm paraphrasing what he said. He said the appeal of mecha is that it's chimeric. Even though he's a highly realistic designer, even in what he does, he's doing chimeric designs. And what he meant by that was his example was the chimera of Greek mythology. It's a combination of different animals, right? It's a lion, a goat, like an eagle, and a snake. And he said the theory is that these are actually all the most dangerous animals that you might meet going up the mountain. These are all the things that might mess up your day if you run into them, right? If you get attacked by them. So in olden times, people they were like, yeah, what are the most scary animals? And then they just put it together in one thing. And he said that's what you do with mecha design, right? It's not actually practical. It's more about like this piece here recalls this piece of industrial equipment, right? This headset, the part of the robot's head looks like headphones. The robot doesn't need headphones, but to a human being observing, like look at Pat Labor, right? They look like they're wearing headphones. And just because you identify with that, you're like, oh, okay, that must be a communication device, right? It must be receiving signals, and and then in Pat Labor, they would dress up. Sometimes they would actually put an extra layer of like a bulletproof flak. I don't know what the term is, but it would look like a bulletproof vest on top of the already like hard metal. And they would recall like stuff that humans would wear, but then like just scale it up, right?
And it's almost anthropomorphic, like it resists like utilitarian.
Well, this is why I want to bring up, for example, the robots in Zyuranger, or Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, as it was known in the West. And these are some of my favorite ones. I mean, just look at this beautiful Tyrannosaurus Rex over here. Just this juicy red color, and it's so simple. There's not a lot of details there, but they're all working. They're all very harmonious. This cute little mammoth guy over here.
Great.
With these stumpy legs.
I'm looking at this book of Industrial Divinities. It's very like, it's got that very like sleek, clean Japanese design, but they do look like animalistic chimeras, and they have a very like almost, I would say, like early 2000s Y2K kind of vibe going with it. It's very interesting. Wow.
Yeah, because they're actually now a throwback. Like robots now are so streamlined. You don't need them to have these complex. And he'll do stuff like part of it might look like a air conditioner or an electrical box. You unconsciously you're like, I'm kind of familiar with these shapes. I think that's the appeal of mecha, is it's drawing on stuff that you consciously or unconsciously already know. Like with Zyuranger, that T-Rex kind of feels like a sports car, right? It's like when you're a little kid, if you see a Ferrari, you're just like instantly, any kid is like, that car just looks awesome for some reason. It's big, it's shiny, it's red.
Or this guy over here, I think this is a big favorite for a lot of people, the dragon robot. Let's see, there we go. Look at this guy, and you could see like these beautiful it's like a temple. It's like a robot dragon temple, and these are like the steps to the temple over here, with the necklines. And it's like a flower in a temple, and it's like
I can completely understand why Power Rangers took a lot of American minds by storm, even if they combined it with things that were not there in the original one. For example, the toys. They got rid of these very aesthetically pleasing patterns over here, and they just had like a Thunderbolt thing over here, which was not as
really?
good. Yeah, for the toys.
I didn't know that. I didn't know they removed
and it was like
more cultural looking element.
Yeah, and it was like a bright green. In fact, I could see if I could find it here. Dragon Zord toy. So if I could put this in, I think you'll be able to see it. So the new ones, I think the new ones have gone back to having those things in, but the original one did not. And let's see if I could find that original one. It's got to be in here somewhere, because the one that I have, it does not have those patterns in here. Yeah, like these are all the new ones. These are the ones that came out with people who are used to it. But yeah, I think I'll get to it eventually. But another thing that I'm noticing, though, and I don't know if this is just because of certain artistic deterioration, or maybe, again, it's just my bias talking here, but I noticed that for the newer Sentai robots that are coming out right now, they are much brighter. They are much like colors are too saturated, and it does not feel as aesthetically pleasing as these. So again, I don't know if I'm being biased, but I could show you an example here. Let's say if I go to the right side here. And by the way, everybody subscribe right now who is listening to this. I just have to find the Sentai Wiki. Here we go, Ranger Wiki. So Ranger Wiki, I recommend you guys check it out. They have a lot of these different series going all the way from the beginning. And the Sentai was originally, I think, based off of Spider-Man. There was like a Japanese Spider-Man that was made, and then all of a sudden they started adding more things to it. But here's, okay, yeah, Super Sentai. So if I go into some of the later ones here, I'm just going to pick this random one here. So, the outfits look nice, but then when I'm going to look at the mecha as well, let's see what I can come up with here. Arsenal. Okay, here we go, mecha. So I'm just going to pick some random one here. Yeah, look at this. Like, I mean, it's too much. There's too many things going on. And I noticed this pattern.
Too gaudy, yeah.
This has been a consistent pattern since 2010 onwards. I don't know why it's happening. I don't know if you have any insight into maybe why certain aesthetic choices are made that go more into this like very overly done direction.
I think that's just sort of a trend in general, like especially in the aughts. Stuff just got like really busy, right? Like stuff just got busier and busier. I think part of that is just access to technology, where like suddenly you could have CG and you weren't limited by shapes and stuff. Like now you can like 3D print stuff. So stuff just got like gaudier just because you could. that whole thing, like just because you could, just because you can doesn't mean you should. But a lot of people suddenly had new tools and they just kind of wanted to up the ante. I think another part of it is also the pressure of having to do a new show year after year. So people don't have as much time to really like sit back and refine things. And then also part of it is probably like people retiring, like probably the people who were behind the stuff that you really liked, like, they probably were no longer directly doing these designs, and it was passed on to the next generation. And then they're coming into an environment where it's like oh, go. Like, you just got to produce. We have to do a new season every year. So I think there's less time to refine it. And I don't know, maybe we're just getting older.
No. I think it makes sense what you're saying as far as why this is happening. But another question that I have, and we're going to be wrapping up soon. We're going to go to the super chats. Need those super chats, people. Do it right now and add a like, because likes help the algorithm. Anyway, when it comes to drawing, one thing that I've noticed, again, is just like you mentioned the line art, how much there's not as much of the construction lines, or that maybe just the impression. It almost seems like certain, very complex forms that are very true to the human body. It's funny because, like we were mentioning before, even though anime came from this more, aesthetic unrelated to having realism, they were still able to capture realism. Like even, like the most low budget of anime is still able to be very exact when it comes to what the thighs look like, what the legs look like, what the chest looks like. It's very, what the arms look like, fingers. So why do you think that is? Why do you think people were able to have so much concentration? Is it something where it's just the amount of time that you put into it, or is it something that if you have it like from a very early age, it just kind of, you know, like you just like pick it up right away, or you pick it up because everybody else is kind of doing like a similar style? Everybody is not similar style, but similar advancement in terms of understanding the human body, or understanding the way that a car works, or the way that a mechanized shape is shaped. I don't know.
Okay, so you're essentially asking like why does it tend to be drawn pretty well, even on a low budget, right? Or...
Sure, yeah. Why is it that the people who are going into this industry able to excel so much with just, you know, this very precise line art when it comes to the human body and shapes?
I mean, there is a lot of like not so great anime out there, so we're kind of focusing on the stuff that is really well done. As you're sort of at like, why anime, that industry? Like, why did they produce so many good artists, right? Mm-hmm. Sort of. So again, I'm just referencing the couple little things I have read. So I'll try to go to stuff with that has a source, right? So in the 80s, Disney started doing TV shows, right? And they actually outsourced a lot of the animation to Japan. So all the early Disney TV shows in the 80s, like DuckTales, Gummy Bears, Rescue Rangers, Darkwing Duck, those shows, the first seasons were animated entirely in Japan.
Whoa.
They were very good.
I had no idea.
Yeah, wow. And I actually found an old article from the 80s. I think the LA Times or something, where they interviewed the guy, because this was a big deal, because Disney has always had a very hardcore audience. And even back then, people were like, oh, how dare you, outsource this work, and, oh, it's going to be lower quality. And they had the guy from Disney saying, like, we're not doing this to save money. We're doing this because we just simply don't have enough animators in America. And here is this country with its own, they have a lot of good animators there. And he even said, like, it's not to save money, because it was the 80s, so the yen was going up every year. It was just simply they had a huge supply of labor, and I think so they had a lot of labor because they had such a rich animation industry. So outside of America, Japan is the other country with a really, really long commercial animation history that's very consistent, because in China and in Russia, you also you have these great animation industries, but they got broken up by certain like governments. There were like decades, entire decades where people were not really producing high quality work, whereas in America and Japan, it's pretty unbroken for like the last 100 years. So they just had that history there. So part of it is just like there just happened to be an industry with a lot of jobs to offer. And then another part of it, I remember, I can't cite the exact source, but I read this psychological study where these psychologists, this is a real study, they were studying drawings from young children from all over the world. And they noticed, this was like in the 80s, they were like, for some reason, kids in Japan are just better at drawing. Like they were just producing more sophisticated drawings at a young age. And I think that's really just, again, up to accessibility. Like they're just exposed to more stuff. They had comics, right? They had manga, and they had access to reams of paper and pencils, and they were encouraged to draw. Like a lot of people. I don't know if it is now, but like in Japan, that used to be the most popular. When they would ask kids, like, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" They would say, "I want to be a manga artist." And even my ex-girlfriend was from Japan. She wasn't an otaku at all. Like not at all, not even into anime or video games. But like when she was a kid, that was what she wanted to be. She wanted to be a manga artist because she had certain comics she liked, and so I think it's just more integrated into the culture. And then I think you see more of that now everywhere. Because before we were talking about, we were kind of afraid that there's all this crappy content on YouTube. Like just absolutely awful artless content. But at the same time, kids have more access to like really cool stuff too. And now you're seeing like 14-year-olds from all over the world, not just America. Like I've seen artists from like, Kazakhstan that blew my mind, and they're so young. And I think it's because they have access to more stuff. and not just stuff that they have access to tutorials that like our generation didn't. Like,
Yeah.
you want to know how to draw something, like just Google it, and you'll find like 10 different things. You'll find YouTube videos explaining how to use Blender, which is free now. You'll find videos on how to use Unity and make your own game, which is free now. And a lot of this is gated by the English language. Like so much of the content is just in English. So, but as long as you know English, the world is at your fingertips.
Yeah, even more power to the Anglo Empire, as it were. But anyway, if there is one final thing I wanted to share with you, which is, well, okay, two quick things. First of all, have you ever heard of the Jack and the Beanstalk anime? This was done back in 1974. And it's a very interesting one to me because it's drawn in this combination of aesthetics that I would say are closer to the, kind of like the American cartoon art, while at the same time they're also bringing in more of the moe type aesthetic as well. So here's the poster for it. So you notice like the styles, it seems to be kind of a mishmash of like the dog, for example, looks like traditional, I don't know if it's Hanna-Barbera or, it's kind of like an American aesthetic dog. Unless, again, I'm misattributing this particular style. But yeah, like look at this dog. This doesn't really look like an anime dog, does it?
That's 1974.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so I got two things to say about that. Number one, I would suspect that whoever worked on this probably worked on Frosty the Snowman, which a lot of people don't know was animated in Japan. The classic American Christmas cartoon, Frosty the Snowman by Rankin Bass, that was animated in Japan. Even their stop motion stuff, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, that was animated in Japan. And so actually this tradition of Japanese people working on stuff for America goes back all the way to like at least the 60s, maybe even earlier. So there was already that influence. On top of that, there's always been that cross-pollination. Like a lot of the early anime artists, of course, famously loved like Disney and Fleischer. So that influence has always been there. And from the other perspective, like the early Disney artists, they would have been influenced by Art Nouveau artists who were really into like Japanese stuff. So it's back and forth. It's
Japonism in Europe.
Yeah.
So I suspect that the people who did work on this already had worked on stuff for America, and we're bringing that kind of back into this. But the other half of it is that a lot of people in America are not as exposed to gag manga and gag anime, and that stuff. Because it's not a lot of when people think of anime, they think of like really beautiful, idealized, just like chiseled people, like impossibly pointy chins and giant eyes and perfect figures. But gag manga is just like really funny looking, and it's more in line with what you would expect from American cartoons. So there's already that whole tradition of like just these goofy, unidealized, rather than iconic, they're more caricatures, right? And so when people see that, they tend to think like, oh, that looks more American, right? But but it's actually
yes, no. I mean, it's a different kind of exaggerated style. So, for example, I think you would see that in certain faces, like in One Piece, where the characters are being very expressive, or in Sailor Moon. Like in the Sailor Moon, I don't know about the manga, but in the anime, you would see a lot of these very stylized ways of crying and reacting. Like here's.
No, but I mean, even like John Kay when he did Ren and Stimpy, like you'd have like those scenes where they'd have like hyper details, but it was usually like creepy and disturbing. Oh yeah, the classic Sailor Moon crying anime girl.
Yeah, but it's not just crying; it's also like this face that I'm about to show you over here. I bet that this would be I bet that this would be a good example of the kind of faces you would see in the gag comics, unless I'm mistaken. So, like this one over here.
Totally.
Yeah, you have a very simple like bird mouth over here, and you have like a thought bubble within this simplified face that's also simplified, and she has like a little demon tail or antennas. I don't know why it's like antennas, like insect antennas in the demon tail. That's kind of an interesting combination. But anyway, there is something again that I like about the Sailor Moon anime, where they have very complex looking human body
while at the same time also having like these very, expressive gags. And lastly, to tie this together with the mecha, I want to show you guys one final thing, and then we're going to go to Super Chats, and then we're going to get out of here. And I really once again appreciate Max Derrat being here, and really appreciate Richmond, you being here. It's awesome stream, one of my favorites. So I want to show you something you may already know. This is Fei Yen from Virtual On, and she is the combination of Sailor Moon and mechas into one thing, which I found to be very, very
It almost
brilliant.
reminds me of Dot from
Animaniacs?
Dexter's Lab.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Dot?
What's her name? The sister's name, not Dot.
Dee Dee.
Dee, yeah.
Dee Dee was into ballet, so that makes sense. And
There you
Fei
go.
Yen's name may come from the Chinese term, which means flying swallow bird. Richmond, can you confirm or deny that? Like that term, Fei Yen. That's what
I know Fei means to fly. I guess yen. I don't know what the word for swallow is. So it's, I'm sure that checks out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think she was designed by one of the original Gundam designers, if I'm not mistaken, like the whole Virtual On series. I don't know if that's a series that you followed.
Oh,
But it's
it's a beautiful series. All those old like Sega Model 2 arcade games, like they still look high tech to me. They're just really timeless. Every time I see one of them, like when I see Virtual On or Virtua Fighter 2, like I just think like this game's from the future. It looks so cool, especially Virtual On, because again they embraced that low polygon aesthetic. Like the mecha designer, he didn't make anything super elaborate with lots of tiny little pieces. He made like really chunky designs that were they were able to just, nail them with the really low poly models.
Definitely.
Yep.
Well, let us go on to the Virtual On. Let us go into the chats, and thank you so much for sneeding the super chats. So, and once again, everybody, please subscribe. The subscription matters a lot. Helps get the numbers up for the views if you add a like as well. And also, if you're enjoying this, patreon.com/breaktherules, become a patron today, and I would be very appreciative of that. We're going to have a Patreon-only streams coming up very soon once again. I want to do a health-related stream with Grimm's Apothecary coming up. I just have to solidify the date, but Grimm is definitely interested in coming in. So anyway, here are the super chats, everybody. Internet Friend, $5 Canadian. Comparing, thank you. Oh, wait, even before that. Before that we have ABC. Wow, a lot of super chats today. Thank you guys. ABC 1 2 3 4 5 6 3 9 9, $2. Anime is pseudo-Christian storytelling.
I can see that.
I mean, it really depends
some of them
on.
are explicitly have Christian themes in them. But like, what was the one where the priest kills demons with a shotgun? You know that one?
No, I'm not familiar with that one unless Richmond knows. Well, another one from the ABC. Not pseudo, but prototypical, rather post-typical. So that's his addendum to what he said before. And then Internet Friend, $5 Canadian. Comparing international success of anime to Russian animation not really succeeding outside of domestic market would be interesting if anyone here is familiar. I mean, with the Soviet animation, it's very interesting. I don't know if you know this, Richmond, but
some of them are great though.
Absolutely. Well, like they're great, but they're very different. Like Hedgehog in the Mist, for example, it doesn't rely on that much, human aesthetic, those kind of crafting things. It's more kind of like the animations that I make, which, since I'm Russian, I guess that kind of makes sense. But it's very interesting, though, where I think you have a sizable portion of Japanese animation aficionados who almost became, cult members towards Sergei Eisenstein, who created Tale of Tales and... Oh, hold on, gone for a second. Tale of Tales and Hedgehog in the Mist. So that is a very interesting thing for me to...
Is that the one with the couple that's, doing the animation that they spent, 40 years on? You know that one?
I think so.
The coat, what's it called?
Well, is he even alive right now? Oh, Norstein. I said Sergei Eisenstein. Shame on me. Shame on me.
There was this one Russian animator that did these really surrealist, abstract processes Like they almost look like Yves Tomby paintings. I have to look it up. Max something. Was it Max?
Max Kaiser? No, I'm just joking.
No. I have to look him up, but if I recall, like I remember my friend Atticus Bones, he got me woke to him. But yeah, Russian animation during the Soviet Union has like a lot of weird stuff going on. It's like they had to like prove to the commissars that it was like culturally relevant or whatever. And they had like these really weird ways of like getting around it. But there's a great atrocity guide episode of this couple that has been doing the same handmade animation for like 50 years about the trend thing. It's called The Coat or something.
Philip says what it is. The Overcoat by Gogol.
The Overcoat by Gogol. Yes. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, there's
exactly.
Atrocity guide. She's a great content creator. So.
And next super chat. I don't know where Richmond went, but hopefully he'll just go in for the end. And if not, we're going to conclude because I do have a hard out very soon. So next one over here. Glow in the Dark. $20.
$20.
Anime became a thing because it was exotic, unique, edgy. The Western animation became more watered down and corporate. They would let a story/character have an end and a complete disregard for the artist working them to near death. I mean, as far as anime goes, though, I mean, I wish Richmond would be here right... Oh, is he back? Yeah, Richmond is back. Here we go. Here we go.
I'm back.
Hey. So it's actually good that you're back right now because I have a question related to what was asked over here by Glow in the Dark. So Glow in the Dark says anime became a thing because it was exotic, unique, and edgy. The Western animation became more watered down and corporate. They would let a story character have an end and a complete disregard for the artist working them to near death. As far as anime goes, though, I mean, I've heard plenty of horror stories about artists being worked to near death. So would you say that this is something that is still happening in the anime video game industries because of, just like the nature of the beast? Or is this something that in the past was way, way, way more hardcore as far as the health problems that the Japanese animators had?
It's actually worse now than ever before. If you read about the old guys, they worked a lot, but they actually got better pay on average than people do now. It's been a big deal ever since the 90s. People in Japan have been complaining about really talented people just dropping out because they simply just can't make a living because it pays very little. What I said before is a double-edged knife, right? Like less pay, more freedom, but then like after a certain point, it's like wow, like they make so little money. Some of those beginning animators, and it's a huge problem there. So. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah,
it's gotten worse.
Well, hopefully it'll get better later on. I mean, we'll see what happens. These things hopefully go in cycles. Anyway, we have another super chat here from Glow in the Dark. Anime is becoming watered down / corporate, or at least the ones being shipped to America. Less edgy, more rounded. I mean, I do want to say real quick that I am noticing there's a lot more of this neoteny. I don't know if neoteny is the right word here, but there's a lot more of this roundness going on in the details. So there was no, not just that. I mean, we'll see if that's an influence too, but it's more like in the 80s, like I was showing earlier, like this girl over here. Let's see if I have the tab open. Yeah, her over here. So this is from Jack and the Beanstalk. This is like more of like an
anime girl though.
80s aesthetic. And then you have, let's see, Mega Zone 33. If you recall, do you remember Mega Zone 33, Richmond? Have you watched that?
Yeah. That another. Probably another inspiration for the Matrix, although that's the one that they deny. Ghost in the Shell is the official one, but the story is super similar with the big plot twist and stuff.
So
that a beautiful style. But that was an OVA though, right? Like that.
It was, but the style itself here, it's similar. It kind of reminds me of Ranma in a way. This here, like these three girls, for example. Like look at the way that their faces are. there is some, there's a softness to the way that their faces are, but it's very 80s. And I don't know why it is that in the 80s they had this very particular style. In the 90s,
mid-range lighting, the type of Technicolor they had,
Well, not even just the color, but just like the way that the lobe is. Look how big the lobe area is in comparison to the mouth.
Giant foreheads, and then like big hair on top of it.
Yeah, and then like if you compare that to something like Tenchi, for instance.
What's the one famous anime with the girl with a nose like that? What's her name? Asuka from
Asuka Langley, from Evangelion. Yeah.
There you go, yeah.
Well, yeah, that would be an example. Another one I say would be like Tenchi Muyo, for instance. You could see a lot more of this like 90s sharpness going on. I mean, same thing with Asuka and Rei, but also this, like, let's see if I have an image of it here. Too many tabs open. That's my problem. But you get the idea. In the 90s, with something like Slayers, for example, it started becoming a lot more sharper, but the eyes got bigger as well. Again, I don't know why exactly it went that direction. Yeah, I think Slayers is another good example of it. It's like a little bit simpler in nature, but you see what I mean? Like the face ends up changing. And I still wonder, like, why is it? Why is it that the faces end up changing in the 90s into this? Yeah, this drawing over here. This is, I think, a good example of it. Like, the eyes just went nuts. They just started getting really, really big. The forehead started to become less prominent, but there was, like, more of a sharpness over here. And, I mean, there's not as much sharp...
is a lot of neoteny. That's...
Yeah, but it's still a different type. Like, like the chin is sharp over here. It could say maybe that's for simplification, but I don't know. Maybe it's just aesthetic and it's beyond our ability to say why. But if you could say, why would there have been the transition from kind of like something like this to something like that? Would there be any reason you could point to, or is just, well, the style changes and there's not much of a reason for it?
I mean, styles are just naturally going to change, right? Like people aren't going to keep drawing the same way, like, forever. And then I think, well, so it's interesting. By the 90s, like if you read the Hayao Miyazaki essays, he complains about like the anime from that period. He's like, it's too busy, right? There's just too many lines, right? Like the eyes are too detailed. And it's because, from his perspective, people were just like really fetishizing the details and just getting lost in that. And you could say it's actually very directly related to the growth of the otaku culture. So in the 70s, anime was just like something on TV, right? There was not necessarily this identity of the otaku and this is my whole life. And then that became a big thing in the 80s. And then by the 90s, you had people catering to that, right? But these were like, and then nowadays, you have people who grew up totally within that. Even in the 80s and 90s, the otaku, they would have been like in their 20s or 30s. They would have remembered a time before the concept of the otaku, the super, nerd. Whereas, so I think it's catering to a more niche audience, but that's just like a small part of it. It's just whoever drew that was personally interested in doing this style. I would say for Slayers, because it's based off of a comic, I think. So when something's based off of a comic, generally, I think it reflects more of the author's sensibilities. And then when you see a lot of the like really super otaku, low budget stuff that's made for TV expressly, like a lot of the harem comedies and stuff, then some of those get like pretty impersonal and just kind of like generic. And then I would say those are the ones that really reflect like sort of the just like, hey, this is just how you're supposed to draw now, right? Like there's less of a personal interest. It's more like it's just a product. And it's like, okay, this is what people like now. We're going to draw it like this now.
Well, and this is also why I do prefer the 90s style to what is going on right now. So right now, for example, oh, nice GIF. So right now, for example, you have something like this. I have no idea what this anime specifically is, but I noticed the same kind of faces where it's almost like drippy. You know what I mean? Like the chin is almost melting down over here.
There's a sort of eroticism there as well with the anime girls.
But it looks too soft, and there's no differentiation in this area over here. If you notice, like there's no transition between the lobe and the and the cheeks. At least this is what I'm noticing. Like it's becoming a little bit more blob-like, and yeah, I don't know what's going on there. But and what is this anime, by the way? Do you know what this is? This girl? I have no idea where she's from. I just found
I
her.
have no clue.
Yeah, I just found her randomly.
Yeah, you
So-
can never tell. They're like, yeah, on the on Twitter especially. It's like,
Yeah.
you know.
All right. Well, anyway, on to the final super chats here. Glow in the dark. Another one. Geo. I'm not a weeb. I have friends into anime, but little did chat know it was me, Geo. I was the weeb all along. All
That's
right.
a reference to Vince McMahon saying, "Austin, it was me all along." That's pretty
Nice.
clever.
All right, and ABC $5. If you've seen Demon Slayer the movie, Rengoku plays a martyr who sacrifices himself. In Naruto, should I spoil? Okay, in Naruto, both characters die and come back to life. Christians. All right, ABC, another one here. In Naruto, the villages are created and upheld and spread like Christianity by the self-sacrifice and martyrdom of the people highest in the ranks. I have not watched Naruto. I feel like this is a spoiler.
Oh, that's
I don't
pretty
want to.
interesting.
It's
I know
yes.
Naruto is like pigeonholed as like popular, like, you know, entry level,
Yeah, normie friendly anime.
normie friendly anime. Yeah, oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, very nice. Well, anyway, Richmond, before we go, I want to do the final promotions for you. You have a podcast yourself, right? Art Eater.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, you can look us up at arteater.com, art-eater.com. We're also on Twitter. That's at Art Eater Podcast. Yeah, and we meet just about every week, and we mostly talk about video games. We once in a while we might branch out into like talking about Kentaro Miura's Berserk, but most of us have a video game background, so we make video games for a living. We love playing video games, so we mostly talk about games.
Nice. And are you guys also still looking for other opportunities in terms of other collaborations, video games, or are you mainly focused right now on this particular game?
Oh, like my company?
Yes. Yes.
Did I? Oh yeah, we're always looking for like new clients. If you are making a game or an animation, and you need to really scale up on production, like we're very good at helping people scale up large like big projects.
Mm-hmm.
When we started off, we worked on smaller projects. So we're at a phase now where if it's like a really small project and you just need a couple hours of work, like that might we're now prioritizing much bigger projects. But yeah, just if you just want to like message me and just sort of ask for general advice on whatever you're making, like I'd be happy to maybe give you some feedback.
Excellent. Well, Richmond, it's been an amazing pleasure talking with you and Max. Thank you so much for the amount of time that you were able to spend here addressing all the questions and getting deep into the anime lore and all that. So excellent stream. I really enjoyed it. Everybody, please follow Art Eater, and also shout out to Glow in the Dark, who is right now king of the super chat. So just so you know, Richmond, you're not seeing it on your screen, but in the main screen, there's a little thing in the bottom, a ticker, where there's like, super chat royalty. So king or queen of the super chat, whoever gets the most money. And right now it is Glow in the Dark. So I just want to do another shout out to Glow in the Dark. You are officially, for now, before somebody kicks you off the stoop, you are king of the super chat with $65 in total super chat accumulation for the month. So congratulations, and thank you guys very much for watching. Please subscribe, add a like, that helps the algorithm. Patreon.com/breaktherules and all that good stuff. I'm going to stop the stream right now. I'm going to stop talking, and thank you guys so much once again for watching. Mwah! Good night,
God
everybody.
bless.
Goodbye.